What is up everyone, it's Saber here and welcome to another Naruto What If you end up liking the video, please consider subscribing. It's free and you can take it back at any time and it really helps me out, and this is my main channel, so if you're interested in what if Naruto had Madara and the QB sealed inside of him, or what if Naruto was Ice Guide to Game of Thrones, go check out my main channel. And if you're interested in what if Naruto was banished and became the Emperor of the West, or what if Naruto was trained by Itachi after leaving Jiraiya, go check out my second channel. And with all of the YouTube formalities out of the way, let's get into it. Fight back, you cowards, run. Where are you going? Lannisters and Tyrells have appeared, your grace. It doesn't matter, fight back, your grace. There are too many, don't run back to the base, stop running, retreat, stand and fight, you curse, please, your grace. We have to leave now, let go of me, you dishonorable bastard, let me go. A sea of banners waved in the cool winds of the early morn. The wondrous dawn broke across the horizon, shattering the somber night. Like the waves of the bay itself, the winter winds had flown through the heat of the night. Before having disappeared, he watched the ships of the Reach float back and forth through the bay. Silence had befallen the prince. While the wildfire had finally run out of fuel, the bay was still smoking from the soft glowing embers of the shredded ship hulls. Across the field, silent sisters and maesters sped from coast to coast and along the beach, working on the wounded and preparing the dead. Carts were loaded, pulled along, sloshing against the still murky waters. The stench was growing, leaving a sickening taste upon Naruto's tongue. He scowled, sapphire blue eyes trailing along the horizon, while the men of House Lannister and Joffrey's personal company cheered through the victorious night. The men of Fox Company went straight to work, cleaning and repairing the damage done to the defenses of the city. Let them cheer and feast, for now, Naruto thought to himself, our time will come soon enough, and when it does, I promise you, friends and family within Fox Company, we'll have more than enough time to celebrate our victories. Naruto, Bran's voice came from his side. The prince turned to his fellow prince, surprised to see the Stark staring off with aimless direction. What is it, Bran? Don't act so surprised. We won, he said with a near whisper. I didn't think we would survive this. I thought. He looked down, brown eyes watering, gloves creased and chafed against the upper limb of his bow. Bran gritted his teeth, clearly at odds with what he wanted to say. After what seemed like an eternity of self-debate and conflict, the Stark looked up to the man he saw as his brother. I thought we were going to die. Naruto, Bran sighed. I thought that after everything we have done, after all the trials and the battles and the victories, I thought last night would be our last night. His eyes trailed back to the bay, watching the great cogs and war galleys sizzle and crack beneath the remnants of the great wildfire hailstorm he'd unleashed. Bran shuddered, ringing screams and great painful echoes came like songs within his tired mind. His breath grew heavy as the base slowly caught fire before him. He could see them running for cover, clawing at their flesh as it slowly melted from their bodies. They were chaotic, fearful dead men before him. Pots of wildfire fell from the sky, crashing upon the shores of the base, spreading across the beach. His breath hitched, feeling cold winds instead of the searing heat of the night. Before he'd lost his voice, Naruto looked at his squire with a worried expression. Bran, are you alright? The Stark didn't answer. Bran, answer me, you're beginning to worry. The young squire snapped straight and turned to face his friend. I'm fine, Naruto, I just need some time to process everything. Like he'd been trying to remind himself, the battle of the Blackwater was over. No more wildfire, no more ships, no more death. His eyes were wide, dry and fixated upon the glowing embers of the shipwrecks. Corpses floated upon the surface, bearing burns and melted breastplates. Swords, spears and axes washed upon the stony and sandy shore of the bay, ringing softly against the solemn morning. Taking a deep breath, the Stark bowed his head at the prince and quickly dismissed himself. Naruto had a burning feeling within his stomach. Something was wrong with Bran, something that needed to be rectified, or else the prince felt there would be too many problems in the future. He ran his hand against the stone Merlin, sliding dust and small pebbles from the surface. We won, he sighed. We fucking won. Naruto sat before his grandfather in the Tower of the Hand. Even before the official induction of the old Lannister, Tywin settled himself and immediately getting to work. Stacks of papers, laws and edicts were created, and the old man only seemed to working extra now. Without armor or trails of blood spread across his face, he was clean shaven and focused on the task before him. Naruto didn't dare ask where his uncle Tyrion had disappeared to and stayed silent before the Lion of Lannister, hoping not to incur the wrath his grandfather was known for silence, stayed hovering above the two like a powerful fog. Sapphire blues watched the emerald green eyes laced with glimmering flakes of gold trace left and right, following his rushing hand. An ink-slicked quill, each scratch and pull against the paper sent shivers and cold rushes throughout Naruto's body, while men in armor with great swords and war hammers were terrifying. Actually meeting his grandfather in this setting made him rife with a sudden fear he had forgotten he had festering within. He watched the man continue writing, dabbing the pen tip of the quill into an ink bottle across the desk. A candle rested beneath a small pan. Naruto quickly surmised the brass pan held melted wax for seals to press. Naruto couldn't imagine having to do this much paperwork. It looked painfully tedious. If only grandfather could use shadow clones, I'm certain he could get the job done sooner. Suddenly the old man grabbed a powder, dashing it across the letter he had just finished, bringing it to his lips. With a quick blow the dust had fled, and in its wake the ink had dried and was ready to be folded and transported. Your silence is beginning to bore me, Lord Tywin suddenly spoke. Naruto swallowed the lump in his throat. Sorry grandfather, I just didn't know what to say. You can start by explaining the arrival of the Tyrells, Tywin said, eyes still planted on the letter. He folded it thrice and reached for the melted wax. I understand that with the death of the naive fool Renly, the Tyrells had no reason to stay enemies. I'm certain with some explanation this whole situation would sit better with my stomach. Why and how did you come by securing their loyalty? Well, the man looked up to Naruto, green eyes glimmering with a deep loathing. Are you going to stutter, or should I give you ample time to spit it out like you're some court fool? The old man said with a deep baritone. When Naruto nodded softly and cleared his throat, the Lannister's eyes dropped to a new sheet of paper and immediately began to write. Go on, you're a Lannister, not a bumbling drunk like your father. When I was captured by Renly, I came to acquire lasting connections with certain lords and ladies among his ranks, Naruto managed to say through half-gritted teeth, among them Sir Loras Tyrell and Lady Marjorie Tyrell, both of which have proven useful and invaluable to my successes recently. Do you think you can trust the Tyrells? Tywin asked. Lowering his quill for a moment, Naruto raised a brow at the old man. I do, without question. They'd risk their lives. Then you might be just as stupid as I feared you would be. The Lannister shook his head. Naruto deflated. My spies say Marjorie only wants to be queen and Loras Tyrell will only stay until he gets to kill Stannis Baratheon. As far as that goes, will you still trust that they'll keep their trustworthy demeanor once they've accomplished their goals? You don't know the things I do then. Elaborate. Tywin placed the quill upon the desk with an amused look upon his face. He leaned into his seat with arms crossed over his chest. When he was met with silence, Tywin once more shook his head and raised his feather quill once more. Let me make this clear to you. You're in no position to make alliances behind my back. As far as I am concerned, you're simply a great fighter of renowned skill and knowledge, not the crown prince or king. If you ever make false claims and send me desperate requests that pull me back from a campaign that took months of planning that could have killed that Stark boy again, I will see to it that you wake up in the dungeons. We are fighting a war. Tywin reminded you had the defenses of King's Landing at your full command, and yet you still deemed it necessary to call me back from the fronts. The blasted young wolf was in my grasp, and yet you pleaded and begged me to return. You wasted my time, especially since you already had the power of the Reach. Look out the windows. Reach levies and men at arms present are more than enough to garrison the city and still have more left in reserve. Imagine if you'd simply let them come to fight off the Dragonstone assault without me. Naruto looked down, biting his lip in frustration. It was a tactical decision that I had to make just in case. It was a wasteful expense of resources and manpower. Tywin glared. And know that I will never come to save your skin again. What? Naruto gave the man a look of surprise. What the hell are you talking about? I stayed and defended the city with all I could give. Did you not see what I had done to the bay? Even beneath a storm of wildfire, the men of Dragonstone were not deterred. What happened, what could have happened, is of no consequence. Tywin spoke with a heavy yet even tone, giving Naruto a petrifying gaze. I did not ask about your strategy, nor do I have the patience to hear the whining tone you've begun to bear. I will not stay here long, for I still have a war to fight. Your uncle Tyrion will continue as Hand of the King until I vanquish that Stark child. You are to stay and defend the city like I already am. Naruto crossed his arms. Silence. Tywin growled. Naruto's mouth dried. I was not finished. You will continue defending the city, but in the wake of your victory, despite how you've managed to waste mine and my vassals' time, you will be Joffrey's Lord of War and sit on his small council. Now, instead of going behind my back, you will be able to make these decisions on your own. Joffrey the fool knows nothing of warfare, judging by his crushing defeat and crack claw point. While I commend him for creating the royal army, his abilities to distribute supplies and resources or creating dependable formations and tactics are woefully lacking. What you are lacking in political tact, Naruto, you make up for with military know-how. Tywin commended, suddenly taking an entirely new tone. Now that I will be leaving the defense and much of the royal army to you, I expect you seek lessons from the worm Lord Baelish or the sniveling snake Lord Varys, neither of which are trustworthy, but they will teach you to understand the political game better than anyone else. Now you are dismissed. The king awaits you in the throne room, and take this. The boy rose to his feet, staring at the newly sealed roll of paper. What's in it? If I may know. A royal edict explaining the extended tenure of your uncle Tyrion as acting Hand of the King in my stead. Tywin sighed. Having survived the Blackwater, he is beginning to prove himself more than useful. Now go, you've been dismissed. And one more thing, Naruto Tywin frowned. It takes more than shortening the list of traitorous lords to make you a player in the Game of Thrones as a word of advice, but good work nonetheless. Nullified and void. Such words had never sounded so beautiful to the red-headed Stark girl. She wore a beautiful yet simple gold dress and held her hair up in a similar fashion. As the lady of House Tyrell, the Stark felt sour and almost terrible for. Thanking the gods that the Tyrell woman offered herself up to Joffrey beside her. Myra Waters stood dressed just as eloquently, all the while holding her knives and blades at the ready. The brunette was all too certain that even with their victory, events were rolling along too smoothly for comfort. Myra worried for her Stark lover and for the safety of her friends. Most of all, what worried her the most, she couldn't point Naruto out anywhere. Joffrey smiled cheekily, garnering a few cries of praise from the ladies of the court and a sundering applause that echoed all too redundantly throughout the confines of the throne room. She could see it as clear as day that the Tyrells were trying to get close to the king, but no one would dare call the heroes of the battle out on their honeypot. Myra smirked, crossing her arms beneath her bust, eyes examining the men and women present within the room. A true turn of events these last few days had been more so the night before. While she saw little action in fighting the invading Dragonstone force, she could see and feel the flames and heat of the wildfire. The night had turned to day in those moments, and the winter had disappeared with the shadow. Myra was impressed and intrigued all the same. With power like this at their disposal, she was certain that her prince would attract more attention from across the narrow sea. Frustration grew within her as she clenched her fists, fighting back the growing scowl, watching the Baratheon bastard king act like he was the true hero of the battle. She was finding it difficult to not explode on the spot. Lady, sensing her discomfort, pawed her leg with a dopey look on her face. The direwolf was happy and seemed ecstatic, relieving the waters of her thoughts. She bent down, scratching the wolf's ear, gaining Sansa's attention. Finally, I told you lady could help. Sansa smirked. Now I wasn't the one who doubted this marvelous pup's ability. Myra cooed at the wolf. What a fine warrior she was. Sansa blushed at the compliment. I've been training her well is all. Now bring forth Brandon Stark and Padre Payne. Joffrey called out after silencing the crowd within the room. What does he want with Bran? Sansa asked worriedly. Who knows? Myra subconsciously rested her hand on a knife. We should wait this one out before reacting. From the built orange block formation stepped the rather tall 14-year-old Brandon Stark of House Stark. He stood proud, garnering a few shouts of approval from his peers and comrade within Fox Company. From what Myra could tell, the young Stark was struggling to keep his smirk from splitting across his face. It was then that it came rushing at her like 1,000 hammers. He was getting promoted to the rank of knight at his age. That was something unexpected. Myra suddenly felt the smile growing on her own face. Looking over, it seemed that while Sansa was still on the ropes, she came to the same conclusion. Their faces and cheeks ached and threatened to split their faces in two. Bran deserved this victory. The Starks deserved the victory. Even when the king fought a war against the Starks, they had a guardian angel that knew to give credit where credit was due. Myra could see his face, already feeling elation rush over her body. At the base of the Iron Throne, Bran and Pod knelt before the king, their heads lowered in respectful reverence. While Bran obviously felt no allegiance to the current king, out of respect for the prince, he swore his life to the Stark Dane for making a scene. Joffrey drew his sword, resting the length of the blade upon Bran's left shoulder before bringing it over to rest upon his right. Taking a step over, he did the same to Pod, nodding and sheathing his blade. Now rise, Sir Brandon Stark of Fox Company, and you, Sir Podrick Payne of House Lannister. As per request, Sir Brandon, you will ride at Prince Naruto's side as his personal aide and companion. Also as per request, Sir Podrick, you will accompany my uncle Lord Tyrion on his journey home to Casterly Rock. Before the two newly inducted knights could make a move, the great doors of the throne room shot open, revealing none other than the missing piece to the party. Like a scene from the tall tales of the Age of Heroes, upon a black steed bearing an armor of orange hue sat the prince himself, wearing a great black sash over his orange-colored Lannister armor. The blonde prince looked fierce and menacing. All the same, he carried with him a powerful aura and a sense of leadership that only those of Fox Company were graced to feel on a daily basis. Ser Loras, along with his sister and brother, nodded their heads at the blonde. The Tyrell trio received respectful bows in return. Behind the prince, Ser Delran rode upon a standard armored destrier bearing a great orange cloth garb. Next to him, Lady Tarina rode upon the large tiger known as Lady Sorsha, with her custom arak and scimitar clanging at her sides. Behind them, the Summer Islander, respectfully known as Prince Jalabar Ho, rode his own mount. With his left leg in bandages behind him covering the rear, the 5 hedge knights who were beyond deserving of proper titles rode with smiles upon their faces. "Your Grace," the 8 spoke together as their heads dipped in respect with synchronization of envious proportions. The men and woman dismounted and landed together in perfect unison. Ser Delran and Jalabar grabbed Brand and gave him a series of congratulations and praise. All the while the prince took to the steps of the Iron Throne. He smiled, nodding at his brother, all the while handing him the letter. "What's this?" Joffrey asked, confused. "Open it and read it." "Why don't you?" Naruto crossed his arms over his chest. "The seal is unbroken for a reason." The king tore the seal haphazardly, unfurling the parchment. Green eyes scanned over each word and sentence. Within seconds he handed the Baratheon the paper and almost seemed relieved. He took a deep breath and headed back towards the Iron Throne. "I've received new information, Ser Podrick. It seems you'll be staying in King's Landing for a while longer. My uncle Tyrion will continue to be the hand of the king in my grandfather's stead. He returned to the fore. From this day forth I name my brother the leader of Fox Company and the mind behind the defense of our city, my lord of war, and he shall sit on my small council. Lord Mace Tyrell, with the absence of my uncle Stannis, you will be my lord of ships and command the royal fleet. Now Lord Baelish, Lord Varys lead the new small councilmen to the chambers. As of now, this meeting is adjourned." Joffrey smiled at the gathered men and sauntered away. 2 weeks later Naruto watched the other councilmen, eyes planted on each and every one, even going so far as to examine his uncle. Mind-numbing and honestly repetitive. The Baratheon was wary of speaking too soon or too late. Each moment was a precious tool that had to be used at the right moment. Sadly, even with 2 entire weeks of inane and mundane actions of signing off requisition and going over strategies with his uncle to further the push against the remainder of the Dragonstone resistance still loyal to Stannis Baratheon, he hadn't learned a single thing about his fellow councilmen. While it was obvious as the light of day that the Lord Tyrell was a bit too far on the side of being a fool, the others were veterans in this game. Lord Baelish was a worm, no more of a snake. Naruto could see it in the man's dark eyes. He spoke like poison with each syllable that left his lips. He was conniving, and Naruto was beginning to sense something else was afoot with the man, but he just didn't have the proof or spies to counter the master of coin. Naruto twitched slightly, thinking of the man's position on the small council. Despite being the simple treasurer of some sort, he still manages to keep the kingdom in debt and somehow pays for the extensive spy network he has at his disposal. From what Myra was able to tell him of both Varys and Baelish's networks, they span beyond King's Landing and the city's courts, but even as far as Marine and Slaver's Bay, and from Myra there were a few that made it as far as the Saffron Strait on the banks of Asshai. How the two managed to amass such a network was beyond him, but it was admirable beyond recognition. Both were old, but neither seemed as old as Lord Aaron before his death. Despite the old man's resilience, he was beginning to show his age, and it wasn't pretty. Baelish in Naruto's eyes looked to be no more than in his late 30s, Varys in his mid-40s, no more no less, but somehow in their time a eunuch and a lesser noble have become two of the most powerful men in Westeros. How Naruto was supposed to learn from them had him in a bind. Baelish could scarcely meet him eye to eye without looking away with that mocking smirk on his face, and Varys would barely acknowledge him and his existence only for information to relay to Myra. Naruto stared across the table, eyeing the Grand Maester. He was released from prison when Tyrion returned to being the acting hand. While the dwarf wasn't too fond of the idea of having the old lecher on the council, he abided the request, and once, almost as if his eyes betrayed him, Naruto found the youngest child of Tywin having lunch with Cersei Lannister, having a conversation with civility between them. With the probable reconciliation, Tyrion standing among his peers in court had risen considerably, but like the other more reputable members of the small council, Naruto found it exceptionally difficult to read his uncle. Even though he spent most of his time with the dwarf, overall the Baratheon felt he had a lot to learn, but he was slowly getting the hang of it, or so he brought himself to believe. The games the High Lords played were vicious, and each second was spent evaluating their rivals, waiting for the inevitable mistake that would be exploited until it exploded out of proportion and the Lord fell apart from within his own power base. It had happened recently to a Reach Lord who held tightly to the death of Lord Randall Tarley with revenge in his sights before the Lord could garner support in the name of insurrection similar to that of the North's rebellion. The Lord was cast down through cloak and dagger. His house was uprooted and replaced by a near extinct house of decades past. The power the lords of the small council held was unbelievable to the prince at first. To him, battles were fought by armies and wars were fought by men who faced one another, but with the recent anger at his ascension through the political ranks, the new Lord Tarley was proving to be a thorn in his side, and Naruto was truly beginning to consider killing off the house in similar fashion as his fellow councilmen had done. Reminisce and mental plots had become the norm for the young prince as of late. With these Men constantly at each other's throats. Naruto had to either adapt or quit. While he was ahead like hell, I'll quit. Naruto clasped his fingers together before his face, sapphire eyes watching the men as they watched him. Alright, now what brings us here today is what to do with Lord Stannis Baratheon. Tyrion spoke, finally alleviating the stinging silence. As we all know, he has rotted in our darkest dungeons for the last 2 weeks. After we caught him on the parapet, I say we execute him for the traitor. He is the boisterous Lord Mace, Tyrell bellowed as he always did, spewing loyalty as if he was a supporter from the start. Oh Lord Tyrell, excuse me, but weren't you a traitor at one point as well? Baelish spoke softly but clearly enough to get the desired reaction. Alright my lords, Naruto spoke up, knowing where this was going. I've spent 2 weeks listening to you rile up Lord Tyrell like a child, and you Lord Tyrell, with respect, you're only giving Lord Baelish satisfaction when you react the way you do. Please stop. The Baratheon ran a hand across his face. Now Lord Naruto, I don't think you should make threats to a high lord like that, told Joffrey's men out on the parapet during the battle. Naruto glared daggers at the master of coin. I could kill you where you stand, and I'll still garner the support of my men, which, excuse me, but Fox Company now numbers at 5,000 men. The original force I was promised to have at the onset of the war. You my lord are in no position to threaten me, chastise me, or even correct me when I'm the Lord of War and the Lord Commander of the City Watch. Wars are not the only way to prove greatness, the worm responded. He gave the Baratheon a knowing look. Is he teaching me? Naruto tilted his head slightly but nodded. Either way. Baelish smiled, shutting his eyes in victory. Either way, we have gotten off track, Tyrion said, pouring himself a chalice of wine. We need to know what to do with the Lord. We can't outright kill him. Naruto crossed his arms. With the death of my father and the murder of my uncle Stannis and I are the only legitimate heirs remaining for the seat of Storm's End and the Stormlands, but of course not many people even still believe that I am a legitimate heir myself. If Stannis dies, we'll throw the southern kingdoms in complete disarray. How many lords have vied for the seat of Storm's End? Too many to count, I'm sure, Baelish responded. We know despite his grace and the wisdom he carries, succession laws and titles might be too much for him to handle. Interestingly enough, we have spoken of this before. Varys chimed with a thoughtful expression. The Stormlands have fallen with no leader and no force to give them guidance. I would have decided at first thought to appoint you the acting lord, but we're already dealing with Northman revolts and Ironborn revolts, and losing we cannot deal with a third, especially now with a situation as delicate as this. I concur. Tyrion sipped away at his wine. We may have secured our position here in King's Landing, but we are far from having victory of any sort. If anything, we've simply awoken a new beast of difficulty in the defeat of Stannis Baratheon and what he'd left behind in his wake. We simply cannot risk plunging the entirety of Westeros into war. Imagine if Dorne were to join. They hate us enough already, and they have my sister. Naruto sighed. I agree, we cannot antagonize the Dornish at all. If we start executing high lords of great houses, it'll only be a matter of time before Myrcella returns to us with her head in a box. It was smart, I suppose, sending her to Dorne. It was a reassurance that they would be free from attack and war. Now I'm not entirely certain they would be keen on keeping the status quo. We don't have the forces to mount a full-scale invasion upon the lands taken by the Northern Rebellion. We don't have the fleets to fight the Ironborn. I ironically saw to it to Wildfire every last ship in Uncle Stannis's fleet. We especially don't have the men to keep the noble houses that are pissed at me in line. If you ask me, all of this sounds like bullshit. The scale is tipped so far against us, I'm beginning to wonder if the Blackwater was sheer luck or just plain stupidity on my uncle's part. Either way, beloved nephew, Tyrion smiled, a victory is a victory even when the odds are stacked high against us. We have to take what we can, else you'll end up like Stannis, bitter, cold, wanting. I say we hold trial for the murder of my uncle Renly, his own brother. Naruto said, I've told you this before. Uncle Stannis used black magic to kill my uncle. I was lucky enough to have been protected by Brienne of Tarth and Ser Loras, but they were too late to save him. My uncle must be held accountable for his actions. Black magic or no, what he did was the worst of any of the sins. He must be punished for kinslaying, at least blacken his reputation farther than it already is. Tyrion asked, giving the boy a look. I suppose that could work. Anyway, on to other matters. What's wrong? Naruto asked. Daenerys Targaryen. Tsunari Kai looked at his cousin, garnering her attention. I think that's her. Daenerys Targaryen. Tsunari asked, that's the mother of dragons. Kai stared at the silver-haired beauty, amazed at her physical appearance. Her dress was beautiful, bearing a professional mixture of teal, turquoise, and gold. What, don't tell me you were expecting more? I mean, Tsunari crossed her arms over her chest, eyes rolled over the Targaryen, as she nodded her head at the various men and women, but to the woman she was not impressed with the Carthene noblewoman garb for a descendant of the Targaryen dynasty. I would have assumed someone that looked more royal. She looks like she just walked out of the slums. She is a Khaleesi. Need I remind you? Kai shook his head. They don't have much when it comes to material possession, and please, that dress looks exquisitely made to you. Maybe. Tsunari dropped the subject, her eyes trailing away to the various denizens of the Carthene gathering. There were merchants Nobles, warlords, and Dothraki bloodriders examining the various gold statues and decorations. Every man and woman examined one another almost as if they were in a trance. Kai didn't even need the Sharingan to realize the Carthage nobles and merchants were nothing short of living a lie outside the walls. Thanks to chakra rushing to his ears, he could hear the screams and begging cries outside the great walls of the city. Winds blew cold from the sea but warm and deathly from the wastes, since he and his troop of shinobi had jumped ship in Karth. The Carthage people and their attitudes did not sit well with the Ashai. These blind fools acted as if the red wastes just outside of their castle walls weren't a danger. With Kalasar after Kalasar that no doubt crossed through the area, their views made his stomach churn uncomfortably. They were a painfully strange folk. The young shinobi heard their half-assed spiel of how Karth was the greatest city that ever was or ever will be, and the shinobi didn't buy a single second of it. But he and 3 other shinobi were here for the sole purpose of finding the mother of dragons. Kai, though, had a different mission on his mind. While their job was to find the Targaryen and convince her to fly east to help defeat the darkness with dragon fire, he needed to find the Shadowbinder who called upon him. While priests and priestesses were able to see visions and flames, this Shadowbinder was different and knew one of the most famous priestesses, Melisandre Kaith, had come into contact with the young Uchiha sometime before Chakra was reborn. She spoke of destiny and filled his head with both fear and a sudden stomach for adventure as he searched. Black eyes jumping from face to face in the distance, Kai caught sight of the woman he was seeking. Kaith, she clearly had an ulterior motive for letting him know, leaving his cousin and fellow shinobi behind. He pushed through the crowd of Carthage nobles and lords. Once he found her, though, she simply raised a hand in his direction, eyes planted on the man she drew tattoos upon. She was smooth and slow with her actions, despite knowing the boy was desperate to know what she wanted. Once she finished the final intricate design, she motioned the tattooed man to leave with a simple bow. The man walked away, leaving the two in privacy. I know why you are here, young Uchiha. Kaith smiled. Come and I will show you. He gave her a strange look, but complied either way, since I have no other choice. The woman clasped his outstretched limb and walked by his side. Instead of delving into history you no doubt have no idea of, I will get straight to the point. Uchiha Kai, you are descended from 2 of the greatest shinobi bloodlines our sad world has ever seen. You might not know your true potential now, but you will have the ability to rise and realize your power. The two walked at a slow pace with their voices held low. And how would that happen? You wouldn't happen to know any shinobi jutsu scrolls still left in good condition now, would you? It will take more than jutsu and knowledge of the past to make your potential come to fruition. Kaith reprimanded. The chakra within you and your fellow shinobi is new and immature. The chakra coils have not fully developed. It will take time for your bodies to get used to the power at your disposal. Kai frowned, not liking the response. We've had the power for a year at most. However, our power's not matured yet. It's simple. Kai. Kaith laughed softly. You yourself are not matured. Your body is not ready for power of this magnitude. The gene pool has diluted and the coils that distribute chakra have weakened now. With the rebirth of dragons and the return of chakra, you among many of your peers will have to learn to cope and force your bodies to mature. Chakra is more than power that the priests and shadowbinders covet, and far beyond the magic that the warlocks hold in such high esteem. Chakra is alive, and when used as masterful as a blade, it is more than just power. So an extension of my own body. Kai asked, how can I learn to do this? Chakra flows through you shinobi, and all those with the right bloodline. There is a Baratheon prince in Westeros that has awakened his chakra. Kaith frowned. As disappointing as it is, there are no known chakra users that have lived through the centuries to teach us. There are no books or scrolls left behind in good condition. This power is as new as it was when it was first conceived, so we're on our own against the darkness. Kai asked worriedly, I doubt you called me here to tell me something we already knew. Of course not, she sighed. You shinobi think everything is lost, but you need to have at least a little faith in your abilities, if not your god. Kai nodded at a few nobles as they passed him and his Ashai companion. But how without knowledge on how to control our power? We're no better than normal men. I guess you will need help. Kaith smiled. Uchiha is a powerful name, and you have many ancestors that have left behind great teachings. That Sharingan of yours can be trained with time. How will I learn? How many Uchiha are even remaining? Kai asked. Last I checked, my father, the last who carried the name before me, was an orphan with no siblings. I never said they had to be among the living to teach you. 1 week later, Naruto ran a hand across his face in frustration. His uncle Stannis was proving to be a royal thorn in his side. He stood before the king with a victorious smirk on his face. The council that sat to oversee the judgment continued, but in awe and surprise at the man's declaration to oversee the trial of Stannis Baratheon and the witnessed murder of his brother through banned black magic, he turned defensive and threw the prince's plans out the window. Naruto didn't like this and leaned into his seat before running the same hand through his blonde hair. "I don't think I heard you right," Joffrey stuttered. "I said I demand a trial by combat, you dolt," Stannis declared once more, dropping a few more insults towards the bastard before him. He turned his blue eyes to the offended Queen Cersei. A dark smirk grew on his face. "Inbreeding ruins the mental capabilities of the spawn as well, your grace. Watch yourself, my lord," Naruto spoke up with a glare. "I'll say it again," Stannis boomed. "A trial by combat. I will fight any champion you put before me. My God will determine whether I will live nor not." Despite how dangerous it was to give Stannis enough chance to prove himself, Naruto knew it was risky to outright deny the demand. Joffrey's hold on the Seven Kingdoms was all but gone to begin with, but to deny a lord a trial by combat was sinful, even if his god was not the same as theirs. Joffrey had to go through with it. The prince frowned, though, thinking of who would be good enough to stand to Stannis Baratheon in a battle of blades. While he was not the best swordsman in Westeros, he was still extremely skilled and a bloody veteran of countless battles. Every name that popped into the Baratheon's head ended with death and the release of his uncle. His uncle Tyrion adopted a look that seemed to mirror his own. Clearly the two Lannisters on the small council were thinking on the same lines, but just like Naruto, the stout Lannister could think of no warrior short of his brother Jaime that could stand up to the staunch Baratheon. In the midst of mental brainstorming and mind-numbing recollection, Naruto's eyes scanned the men and women present, waiting for their reaction, listening to their comments as they came in earnest. Many were disgusted and almost teetering on the line, offended by the self-proclaimed king's demand. Many of these nobles were fiercely devoted to the faith and found Stannis's very appearance appalling. A heretic demanding they follow their laws, the laws of their gods. Men and women were in uproar, declaring Stannis a heretic and a murderer. They cried out obscenities and foul words of varying degree, each plunging deeper than any knife. The Baratheon Stormlord seemed unfazed, taking their statements and snide remarks in stride. He stood proud, that confident smirk still planted on his face. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the veteran of war. Stannis was hoping for someone simple minded to fight. Naruto knew the old man was no zealot. Naruto knew Stannis cared not for the gods and the laws the Septons placed and created. This was simply a ploy to return to Dragonstone. Naruto wanted to plan this correctly, for even the smallest misstep out of place and Stannis would be freed, and they'd find themselves with more problems than their plates and hands could handle. It was nothing short of a mind-numbing situation that needed a more delicate mind to truly relish and understand. His eyes trailed to Lords Varys and Baelish, finding their eyes examining all the same, silent as the spies they had employed within the crowd. While Varys carried a worry in his cold eyes, Baelish reflected a sniveling glimmer within his, akin to that of what Joffrey held before losing his courage. "Who will be your champion?" Naruto asked, speaking up for his faltering brother. "Those who demand I will be my own champion," Stannis chided. "I'm not the dwarf where I need someone to fight my own battles. I don't understand why you continue to insult my family." Naruto glared. "Continuing on this trail will lead to unexpected accidents, my lord. You won't kill me," Stannis smirked. "Kinslaying is the last thing I'm certain you'd want on your already stained reputation." "I never said I would kill you," Naruto responded with a steady tone. "There are more ways to make one suffer. Death just happens to be the most permanent of the choices available. You think yourself untouchable, indestructible even. I'm sorry to tell you this, but you're just as deluded as I've come to believe. That Red Witch of yours has done questionable things to your head. It seems we shall see." Stannis stood straight, expression held constant. Naruto scowled, looking to Joffrey's worried looks and the otherwise unaffected council. Tyrion continued thinking, sipping softly at his wine. Varys and Baelish were silent in the midst of Naruto's outburst, and Lord Mace was silent, finding his voice gone. He sighed in frustration. The lords of King's Landing in court demanded the death of Stannis outright. The council was indecisive, but leaned towards the trial by combat. The decisions they had at their disposal weren't many and were definitely not entirely in their favor. Leaving him to rot was out of the question. Naruto knew that Stannis could break free from the dungeons, having spent time in King's Landing for a long while as the Lord of Ships for his brother Robert Baratheon. The Baratheon could not be given a chance to return to his forces and kingdom in the Narrow Sea. Gods damn it all, if we give him a fight, who would stand up to him short of Uncle Jaime? Naruto frowned. "Grandfather would never give in to one of my requests again, so getting the mountain isn't a choice either. Maybe Ser Delran or Jalabar. No, too risky. None of the companions will fight Stannis. The only reason we managed to get him was because he was tired and all of us were together. Stannis would cut them to ribbons if he was given a one-on-one fight. Maybe Ser Delran could stand up to him, but what if he can't?" No. Naruto rose from his seat and leaned over to Joffrey. "Joffrey, let Me give the verdict. Are you sure? The king gave him a glare on the king. Yes, I don't care. Naruto returned the mirth. I didn't ask. Let me give the verdict. Joffrey shuddered beneath the prince's gaze. After shaking his head, the king nodded his head, all the while leaning into the Iron Throne. Naruto turned to the crowd, his expression almost a mirror image of Stannis' own expression. The self-proclaimed king looked confused, and in just an instant his facade of confidence and power had vanished. By the power vested in me by the gods and our king. Naruto pointed at Stannis Baratheon, we accept your demand for a trial by combat. I have taken it upon myself as the Lord Commander of the city. Watch, the Lord of War and the sole anointed defender of this city and my dynasty. I will be the champion of the king. Night had come, bringing with it the cool of the growing winter. Men and women had fled the streets and returned to their hovels. Gold cloaks and fox company patrolled the streets, catching thieves and rapers lurking the shadows. Banners flapped in the wind, slapping and clapping against nature's breath. Bells tolled softly, sound barely left the confines of their tall towers. Men and women slept in relative peace despite the massive battle that had taken place barely 3 weeks ago. Through the vermilion halls and great corridors of the Red Keep, upon a bed wrapped in linens, Naruto and Sansa lay, their eyes locked in silence, examining each other's features. Sansa's hand rested on his bare chest with a light lush on her cold cheeks. She was scared for his life, having heard of the things his uncle had done in his long history as a warrior. His victory at Storm's End during Robert's rebellion made her shiver with fear. A man of that caliber, of that experience, of that knowledge of war, will fight Naruto tomorrow. Her hand slid against his sweaty skin, fingers running against the troughs of his scars and muscles. She caressed him, holding him until her palm rested upon his scarred cheeks. Ice blue eyes glowed in the dim light of the moon with a ghostly aftertaste. Her eyes examined each gash, feeling the depth of the damage. Sliding her fingers against them sent electricity through her body, from her hands to the base of her spine, reminding her of a mixture of fear and excitement. Without a thought, she leaned her head into his neck with his chin resting upon her scalp. Naruto. Sansa's soft voice vibrated against his neck. Are you sure you can do this? The prince stayed silent for a few minutes. The longer he held his silence, the greater the Stark's anxiety grew. What do you mean? Slowly her hand slid once more against his skin to rest on his bare chest. Don't play coy, you will be fighting your uncle tomorrow. I know I can win this. Naruto's eyes slowly shut as his arms snaked around Sansa's nude form beneath the bed linens. It's what happens afterwards that I'm more worried about. Kinslaying is never a good thing, even with a trial by combat. Sansa frowned, fingers sliding against his skin. Do you have a plan for what happens if it comes to that? I do. Naruto sighed. It's unorthodox, so I'm not entirely certain people would like it, but if push comes to shove, you will do the deed, won't you? She shook her head into his neck. Everything has been stacked against you since my father died. Everything has been stacked against us. It won't have to be that way, Sansa. He brought his thumb to her chin, slowly bringing her eyes to meet with his. Soon, I promise, we'll be wed, and we won't have to worry of any of this. I will hold you to your promises, Lord Naruto. She smiled. On your honor, swear it. A chaste smile spread across his face beneath the dim light of the moon above. I swear it on my honor as a Baratheon and on my honor as a Lannister. We will be wed. We will have everything we deserve. Sansa didn't say a word and simply snuggled closer into the Baratheon's chest, relishing in his warmth. Her arms held him tightly, not daring to let him go, while the two enjoyed one another's embrace. Through the closed doors of the prince's balcony entrance there sat a woman with eyes glowing hot with anger. Her hair was tied into a long ponytail, letting the brown locks flow in the winds. While she would have joined the two lovers in their sexual escapades a little longer, she had other things on her mind. With a hand rested upon one of her dagger hilts, with staunch vigilance she examined the distance and the endless horizon beyond. Myra needed to protect her prince, and she had received uncomfortable news of Ashai shinobi aiding Daenerys Targaryen and Karth. Ashai shinobi who were gifted with strange abilities that seemed inhuman and impossible. She gritted her teeth. They ran up walls, ran up trees, jumped more than 10 feet into the air. The list of their amazing abilities astounded her and sent shivers up and down her spine. Her chocolate orbs trailed back to the prince's room, taking in the image of her Stark and Baratheon lovers. They were in bliss, holding one another like lost lovers. A genuine smile found its way onto the bastard's face. Her heart hurt to admit the two looked adorable together. At the least she had both of them to herself, and she loved every second of it. Myra leaned against the stone brick's head, resting in place with one leg slung over the railing and the other resting upon its surface. The woman sat in silence, the heated glare having never once left her face. As she stared further, she came to accept that her biggest fear has become her reality. Shinobi were among them. There was no way in any of the 7 hells that she'd forget her confrontation with the Ashai that was sent to kill Naruto more than a year prior. He was fast and he was strong, and as far as she knew, he didn't share the same power as these new shinobi who sided with the Targaryen. Myra leaned against the stone wall, pressing her head into the bricks with frustration. She kept her mouth shut as she kept her watch. The city was quiet and the bay was just as Silent, the scars of the Battle of the Blackwater remained like horrid festering gaseous trees were gone on both sides of the bay, and ship hulls still remained protruding from the surface of the bay. Their banners and shredded sails flapped in the winds, casting a plethora of dancing shadows across the glimmering waters. Golden shimmers flashed in her tired eyes. From across many different points of the city, thanks to Naruto's orders of more night patrols, the gold cloak's effectiveness had increased substantially as opposed to the last few years. Berating herself for leaving her lovers early, Myra crossed her arms over her bust, brown eyes trailing down. The taverns and inns still open at this time. The moon was high, telling her it was past midnight, and in normal circumstances these businesses would have closed an hour before darkness. She reminded her tired mind in the shadows that is where her enemies lurked. A scowl was adopted, replacing the glare and examining look. She was finally alone and free from the prying eyes and worried looks of her peers. Despite the two most important ones were in the room behind her, she shook her head, eyes trailing to the banners of House Tyrell. While she had no issue with Lady Marjorie finding her a great player of the game, what made Myra like the woman further, she was genuine. Despite her skill at playing the Game of Thrones, she was kind, caring, and above all else cunning. Myra respected those features and enjoyed the few talks she had with the Tyrell. What she didn't enjoy, though, her sister Catherine, the damned whore, had returned with Marjorie from Storm's End, keeping her image as a simple handmaiden. How the woman was able to keep her facade going for this long made Myra question her abilities. She raised a hand, staring at the bare palm, shivering as she could feel energy swirl and run thought her bloodstream. What will Naruto say about this? She was dying to tell him that she knew his secret. She wanted to comfort him. She wanted to remind him that Fox Company would respect and follow him to the ends of the earth. She wanted him to confide in her, and she wanted to do the same with him. Myra bit her lip, hands twitching softly as they trailed over the various knives and smaller handheld blades strapped to her body from head to toe. She felt a familiar warmth spread throughout her body as opposed to the piercing cool of winter's breath. She could feel energy, a warmth that seemed to belong to only one other person before her. She wanted to tell him that he wasn't alone. Naruto Bran looked nervous as he cleaned the prince's bastard sword. You're certain you can do this? Why is everyone doubting my ability? Naruto asked with a heated glare. Sansa said the same thing last night. Myra said the same thing. Serdell ran. Lady Terena, the bloody hedge knights, I can fight him and win. We're not doubting you. Naruto Bran frowned. We're worried for what might come afterwards. Remember, we're trying to make you king. Last I checked, many lords don't like kinslayers, or at least they say so. To curb the wrath of the High Lords, you two are the last Baratheons. It would be a shame to end the line here and now, like I told everyone else. Naruto shook his head. If push comes to shove and he forces my hand, I will do my duty and end him rightly. Until then I will keep to my plan, I promise. Naruto Bran glared. If it's a replay of the Blackwater, give me some context, at least a real hint at what your plan is. Now why would I do that? Naruto gave the Stark a confused look. Bran gritted his teeth. I'm a bloody anointed knight, and I'm also your personal aide in battle. I have a right to bloody no. Hey Naruto crossed his arms. Knighthood or no, I'm still keeping my plans to myself. Only when it comes to company-based tactics I'll let everyone know, but for now enjoy the surprise. Not everything has to be a surprise, you know. Bran sighed, rolling his eyes softly. When the people demand a show, they'll get one. Naruto laughed. Especially when it comes to the lords and the Game of Thrones. You keep talking about the game. Bran frowned. How many lords have we killed or taken out of commission for the sake of playing the game? You and your sisters became players of the game the instant you stepped past King's Landing's walls. Naruto reminded, I think it would be best if you, an anointed knight, start paying attention to the happenings between the lines. Look to the crowd. Bran, what am I supposed to be looking for? Bran asked, scanning the men and women walking past one another, taking and pulling seats in the stadium. Fox Company levies stood at every entrance, aided by a gold cloak. Men and women cheered and called out to one another. There were a few that already had roasted boar and a rotisserie chicken already sitting pretty upon a silver platter. Bran was at a loss for what he needed to see. Watch them. Tell me how many lords you see, Naruto asked. Tell me how many are or even were loyal to us. I see one or two, Bran responded. But I don't see how that matters. We can't kill them out in the open, you know that. Naruto frowned. I never said anything about killing them. There are greater spectacles witnessed through mercy than there are through violence. So you're saying a trial by combat is nothing more than a glorified play? Bran looked almost disgusted. What is the point in all of this? The trial by combat is nothing more than a justification to kill someone. Naruto laughed. If the warrior who demands a trial by combat wins, he's free to return to wherever he came from. The gods will be determined through the clash of blades. It makes no sense to me, but I'm willing to accept the sacrifice. Remember, Bran. Naruto rested a hand On the Stark steel pauldron, never send someone to do the dirty work when you are more than willing to make the sacrifice yourself. Understood, Sir. Brandon nodded his head. Here's Fox Claw. Naruto grabbed the bastard sword, swinging the masterwork beauty through the air. He cut the wind and twirled the hilt between his fingers, relishing in its lightweight tapered blade and deep fuller. The sword was near perfect. He left his tent and was welcomed into the center with a thundering applause. Lords and knights cheered and raised their arms and glasses in his name. Tyrion sat upon a grand seat normally dedicated to the hand of the king, taking precedence and judgment in Joffrey's place, giving Naruto more confidence in his battle. Stannis Baratheon stood across him with his glowing sword, the proclaimed Lightbringer from the legends of Azor Ahai. Naruto didn't believe for a second that the weapon his uncle carried was the legendary sword, for a blade dedicated to the Lord of Light, raw or the steel was rather cold. When Naruto disarmed the old stag, the Baratheon stood dressed in his standard combat armor as black as the land from whence it was forged. The old man stretched and prepared his arms for the clash of blades that could determine the rise or fall of his dynasty. The winds were cool and the sun beat upon them like hammers. The lords of Westeros, still loyal to the crown, watched with anticipation, bouncing at their heels. The winds picked up, whipping powerfully at the stakes and pole arms that bore the banners of Fox Company and the king. Naruto smirked, relishing the beauty the winds carried. He shut his eyes, feeling each caressing breath rush against his skin. Unlike Stannis, who shivered softly despite being confined to the darkest dungeons they had for the last 4 weeks, the man was as resilient as the young prince could have ever hoped. He would be a man of his reputation and staunch views of justice and righteousness had to uphold it even when his life hung in the balance. Sapphire eyes met as the two sauntered up to the center, their leather boots tapping against the limestone slabs. Naruto was dressed in his orange armor and black sash. He looked reminiscent to his grandfather in the Lord Tywin's youth. He looked strong, tall, and carried with him a presence that only few have managed to match. To many of the nobles, they questioned if this was the same monster from a year past. It was hard to believe that the man the king and his council had worked so hard to demonize was anything like they said. While many thought alike, they knew that what had happened. There was no turning back, and they hoped collectively that the young Baratheon prince would survive this bout. Are you ready to answer for your crimes, Uncle Stannis? Naruto asked softly. There are no crimes for me to answer for. Stannis spat. Are you prepared to lose your life? Naruto scowled. I will not be losing my life today. He swung with lightning, striking Lightbringer. The steel sung like the birds in the trees. Like the young prince had expected, Stannis held strong. Naruto jumped back, creating a large pocket of distance between the two of them. Nobles and ladies gasped and whispered among their circles, amazed at his agility across the small arena of swords. Stannis seemed unimpressed and rather bored with the circumstances, twirling his longsword. The Baratheon inched closer to his nephew. Naruto smirked to himself. Finding the old man closing into his trap, he rushed forward, catching the Baratheon off guard. Taking air to his feet, he kicked Stannis in his chest, cutting his strategy in half. Taking the initiative, he rushed forward, striking at Stannis' weak points, probing his defenses like he'd assumed Stannis was holding tight, leaving little room for Naruto to take advantage of. In a split second, Naruto flipped back, hurling a throwing knife at his uncle with chakra enhancing his speed. He'd drawn out a second knife like a specter. He chucked the knife at the same speed as the first. With accuracy unlike any other, the knife spun at the same speed, and the two reflected each other's flight path. They traveled as one, and Naruto knew there was no way the self-proclaimed king could manage to deflect both. As the knives closed the distance, Naruto noticed something peculiar. It was then that his stomach dropped. Fire grew within the Baratheon's stomach, and it spread unlike anything the young prince had ever seen. As it would be, Naruto seemed to be the only one to see the power within. His uncle people were in awe and at the edge of their seats, amazed at the sudden show of skill. Stannis Baratheon blocked both knives. Naruto gripped his bastard sword, glare only deepening upon his brow. How the hell did he know there was a second knife? Naruto ducked beneath an even swing, taking to the limestone slabs. There was no way he could have known. Dodging strike and lunge after lunge, Naruto could not figure out his uncle's sudden perception. He ducked once more, even punching at the Baratheon, but like before, the man would swing his sword or somehow manage to see his attacks before he even did them. Naruto didn't like the sudden turn of events. He backed away, bringing Fox Claw up to the fore, keeping the elder man at sword length. Blue eyes locked with blue eyes, Naruto was half certain that he could feel lightning build between them. Silence fell upon the gathered men and women, awaiting for the first one to break it. The prince dashed forward, sword brought back for an overarm strike. Sparks danced in similar fashion as blade kissed blade in a violent embrace. While Stannis was far more skilled, the young prince was faster than any other sword duelist the nobles had ever seen. He moved like the winds and struck with a strength that even the witnesses could feel once their blades held steady and the two were brought to a standstill. Naruto had a good moment to truly analyze his uncle. In his eyes there was a fire unlike any other as he looked deeper into the man's sapphire orbs. He came to realize a familiar shape, a heart ablaze slowly took form within his irides while a stag in a burning heart was upon the Baratheon's armor. This heart was different, it was beating, it was alive. Naruto broke their clash, bringing his sword to defend, realizing that the heart he'd seen was all too similar to the one he saw during one of his strange dreams. It was too similar to be a coincidence. He clenched his teeth when their eyes bore holes. It's time to end this, he dashed with chakra radiating off of his legs. Amazement and powerful gasps were heard coming from the stands. The two blades clashed once more with a shower of sparks flying in every direction. The prince quickly slid from the standstill, raining sparks in his lightning-like wake. Stannis was fast and knew what he was doing, but not once considered the underhand tactics the prince had learned during the war. Like a foreign mummer performing her amazing flexibility, his foot shot around Stannis' flanks and slammed against his cheek, bruised and stance broken. Naruto smiled and swung with all his power towards the Baratheon's unprotected chest. It was then that he felt power once more. It was darker, far more sinister than before. The power was stronger and filled his heart with a festering fear he hadn't felt since his time rotting in the dungeons beneath the Red Keep. Redirecting his blade, he deflected a retaliatory strike from the Baratheon and quickly jumped back, throwing a few more knives at the man's direction. He frowned when the power only seemed to grow. Someone is controlling him. While this power isn't chakra, it's magic of a different caliber. Naruto glared. If only Sasuke was around to help me. Damn my luck. She couldn't believe her eyes. Myra clenched her fists when the first bout of magic tainted the air she breathed. She could sense it as clear as day. Those around her were none too aloof. Lords and ladies watched with excitement, sipping apprehensively at their cups and chalices of wine. Some were almost aghast at the elder Baratheon's skill at holding off the young prince. As far as they were concerned, Naruto was one of the greatest duelists in the Seven Kingdoms, especially since he'd managed to fight through a war-torn country and defend the city from the largest force the war has seen. Myra watched, glaring at the traces of magic. She could see someone was controlling the Baratheon king. His eyes, from what she could see, held something new, something sinister, like an inferno just waiting to burst. As Naruto rushed in, probing his uncle's defenses, she was certain he took notice of the magic radiating from his uncle. He was filled with it, but it was not chakra, it was something else. Myra hadn't seen something of its kind since her powers had awakened. While she didn't have as much as Naruto did, she could damn well sense it. If anything, her skills were simply heightened. She rose from her seat, catching the attention of Sansa and a few of the lords surrounding them. Myra, where are you going? Sansa gave her a worried look. Lady sat beside her and gave her a worried whine. I need to check something. Fox Company business. She frowned. Sansa didn't believe her but nodded her head either way. Alright, but don't take too long. Myra bowed her head softly and took off from the stands, doing her best to stay as inconspicuous. Clashing blades and a few roars were heard as her back was turned to the fight. Winds were growing in strength as she ran down the steps, knives in hand and a determined look in her eyes. While she couldn't manifest chakra like Naruto could, she could definitely increase her physical prowess. A few guards looked at her with confused looks, but thankfully Fox Company levies knew better than to question any of the battle companions. She nodded to the sergeants gathered and give quick orders to patrol the area. The levies were confused but did as they were ordered, gathering teams to tackle different sections of the area. The first group took it upon themselves to enter the stands and watch the entrances. The areas already had men defending them, but Myra didn't worry. Across the garden, another team of levies walked about, hands on the hilts of their swords and shields already equipped. While she didn't expect them to fight whomever the one casting magic was, she knew they'd cause enough noise to get her attention. Taking a quick roundabout to the far right end of the garden, she found an area that was not ventured to by many. The Godswood of King's Landing was a place barely visited by the denizens of the city. It was empty and had a good vantage point of the dueling arena, which lied along the Blackwater Rush. As she traversed the area, her visibility of the fight was beginning to diminish as trees and decorative brush began to grow in size and number. To her most recent knowledge, Naruto was holding his own. He always did. Lost in her thoughts, she hadn't taken into consideration the growth of nature surrounding the Godswood, jumping over growing hedges and bushes. Impatience grew in her bones. Were you so you were looking for me? The young bastard shot her head back around, eyes wide with fright. The voice sounded shrill and yet felt smooth like silk. Her eyes ran up and down the woman, dressed in simple garb. She looked like any other maid within the castle, but she was covered in blood, with a hand in the head of a smoking levy. Myra's skin turned cold at the sight behind the newcomer. Almost 7 levies were dead, their skin having been scorched. Myra cursed herself, realizing that the smoke radiating from their corpses wasn't black enough or even visible enough for anyone but her to notice. She took in her surroundings, cursing the hedges and trees Eyes returned to the woman covered in blood. That look, she felt her heart skip a beat. That smirk, your Myra couldn't believe her eyes. The red witch Sansa groaned when Naruto was suddenly picked up and thrown across the arena, but like before he threw more knives only for each one to get blocked. She cursed him, wondering why he was holding back, but her fears were realized when Stannis switched the tables and went on the offensive, swinging and slashing for the prince. Naruto ducked and weaved between each slash and swing, making the hairs stand on the back of Sansa's neck. Each attack was too close. Each attack could have ended his life right then and there, but he was defending and assaulting in a perfect combination, holding off the assault. The attacks were accurate, but Naruto just happened to be faster. He punched, pushing Stannis back a few steps, and he gained the upper hand. Sansa clenched her teacup and lemon cake with fear beginning to seep into her bones. Stannis was cunning with his attacks and baited the young prince constantly through the fight. He'd leave breaks in his defense and leave seemingly perfect openings to take advantage of, only to block and parry the prince's moves. Sansa was going insane watching the fight. Naruto was no water dancer and used underhand tactics a lot. She frowned, sipping her tea, imagining if she and the Baratheon had switched places, Stannis would be on the ground in a pool of his own blood. Naruto kicked the man and quickly followed with an overhand strike as fluid as water. While Sansa commended his attack to her, it was a bit too showy. She was hoping that he'd take the fight seriously. To her, she was certain he was playing with his opponent. It was then that she sensed something wrong. While Arya chose to stay in the training field within the Red Keep with Brienne of Tarth, Bran across the dueling field was looking nervous in this cold. He was sweating, his eyes were dull, and he looked like he was about to faint. Lady, the ever-loyal direwolf, seemed just as nervous. Her head held low and whining, she rubbed her armored back against Sansa's leggings, trying to get the Stark's attention. Sansa rested her hand against the direwolf's ear, rubbing her softly. She groaned softly when Lady wouldn't calm down. She looked down to the beautiful beast with a glare. What is it? Sansa asked with a glare. The wolf started pointing her head towards the direction Myra had disappeared to. Sansa gave her an estranged look, but having learned to trust Lady's instincts, she rose from her seat, dress flowing against her leather leggings. A few nobles looked angered that she'd suddenly get up and block their view, but after a few dark looks and Lady's soft growls, the lords were shut quiet. The men of Fox Company helped Sansa through the crowd of nobles and escorted the lady and her companion down the stairs. After giving the men a soft curtsy and receiving bows in return, Lady's attitude had not changed in the slightest. If anything, the wolf got angrier. Lady, Sansa frowned. If only you could talk to me. As the cheers and cries of the nobles and Naruto's roars grew in volume, it was beginning to truly sound like an arena or a tourney of some sort. Sansa could barely hear herself think. Taking a brisk walk through the gardens placed right behind the arena, she was surprised at the lack of guards. A confused look had found its way onto her face. I thought Myra was checking up on Fox Company, not changing guard rotations. Where the hell are the guards? The Stark looked down to see her. Direwolf was tense beyond reason. She bared her teeth with a hunched back and shaking fur. Tully eyes examined the garden, looking for signs of conflict. She looked for bloodstains or even the faint glint of armor. In the light of the sun, she journeyed through the various walkways and paths that wound throughout the gardens. There would be guards along the sea wall as well, but the gardens were ghostly empty. Running a hand through her red hair, she drew a dagger gifted to her by Myra after the battle. While the blade was a simple double-edged steel make, but the centerpiece of the beauty was the ivory wolf head that acted as the pommel but cap. She shut her eyes, doing her best to let the sound drown out from her mind. From the crashing waves and the still creaking debris from the Battle of the Blackwater to the clashing Baratheon swords, and the cheers and cries from the large crowd, sound fell upon deaf ears. Once she opened her eyes, she sheathed her dagger and immediately bent down to rip the hem of her dress. It was restricting, and Sansa felt she would need all the movement she could have. Myra was gone, and she couldn't think of any place the girl would go to if she was checking on Fox Company. The bastard wouldn't do something as foolish as completely remove the guards from duty. There was something wrong, and Sansa knew it. She just couldn't figure it out. While her sword was left in her quarters, her dagger would have to do the job for now, she supposed. Giving Lady a nod, the two took off once more, examining the gardens and surrounding areas with clear minds. While the two Baratheons were fighting it out, yelling and shouting as they did so, Sansa ventured to the sea wall, searching for signs of the guardsmen. Hearing the waves crash against the rocky shore sent shivers up and down her spine. It sounded coarse and unnatural. With a quick glance, she took notice of more debris washing ashore. She even noticed dented and melted helmets washing ashore. Who knows what else might wash ashore? Suddenly a shrill scream caught her attention. Her head snapped towards the arena and took off as fast as she could. Lady raced ahead, jumping over bushes and low hedges, leaving her master behind. Sansa's stomach had dropped at the sound, fearing the worst for Naruto. From the commotion, her brother's voice boomed, screaming the prince's name, only adding onto her terror as fear crept up. All the girl could see was tunnel vision. All she wanted to see was the arena. She wanted to see her prince standing victorious over the king's corpse. Bang! The girl lost her footing, shooting for the ground like a pot of wildfire. Adrenaline rushed through her bloodstream, and just before her face kissed the stone slabs, her hands shot before her and stopped the fall just in time. Anger and embarrassment followed after the fact, and like anyone else she quickly searched for the perpetrator of her disappeared balance. Was it a small animal? A lone branch from the many trees? Sansa's eyes were as wide as plates from what she saw. Her body froze like the dead trees of Winterfell. Her hand rested upon the dagger strapped to her thigh, almost like a second nature hidden beneath the bushes. Fox Company levies laid. She'd tripped over the exposed helmet of the guard's corpse. What is going on here? Naruto stood victorious. Sweat dribbled down his brow as the fight came to a sudden close before him. Stannis knelt, sword arm missing and right leg stumped at the knee. Naruto held his sword at the ready, pressing the tapered sword tip at the man's exposed throat. Blood dripped to the stone slabs like a waterfall surrounding the king in his own filth. Taking short breaths, inhaling through his nose and exhaling through his mouth, the prince looked to his uncle Tyrion for permission to continue, but once his sapphire eyes took notice of the Stan's, his heart dropped for a moment. Sansa and Myra were missing. He turned to the Stark Knight standing in the tent with a confused look spread across his features. Bran simply shrugged and crossed his arms over his chest, turning his attention back to the Baratheon kneeling before him. Naruto for a moment almost dropped his guard at what he saw. Stannis was smiling. The prince pressed the blade against the man's neck, drawing blood once more. What is so fucking funny? Your life is forfeit. If you think it was going to be that easy, Stannis spat, you're the most foolish man I've ever met. Suddenly a shrill scream grabbed Naruto from his trance. Naruto! Brandon's roar echoed like thunder. The nobles, Fox Company. The prince froze for a moment, looking upon the crowd of nobles and noblewomen. Blood rushed into the stands as men and women rushed to escape the onslaught within. Luckily for the young Prince, Tyrion and a few of the more important lords were quickly helped away, practically tossed over the podium. Naruto knew it was a great decision to keep Bronn around. While Naruto was glad he convinced his mother and the small council not to attend the trial, his body shook with a dangerous mixture of rage and fear. It was then that it struck the prince like a warhammer. Fox Company hadn't heard Bran's cries to action. Never had the men of Fox Company ever ignore an order from the battle companions. Naruto turned to his uncle with a slight vermilion hue burning into his sapphire eye reeds. The crippled man simply continued to smile. What have you done, Naruto? Shouted Fox Company. Where are you? Naruto's voice was louder, far more powerful than Bran's, but even then not a single man dressed in orange heeded the call. Where are your forces? Nephew? Stannis asked through a blood-drenched smirk. Naruto nearly dropped his sword. Myra, Sansa, Bran. Naruto shouted, watch this bastard. Bran rushed up to the Baratheon king, shoving his foot against the man's back with rage. Naruto turned his attention to the Stan's, sword in hand, but like any day in Westeros, one problem always came after another. No, Bran's voice could be heard across the stands. Men and women froze as heat, unlike any other, rushed through the area to Naruto. It felt too close to wildfire. He whipped around, eyes betraying him. The gods would. He clenched his blade as tight as he could. Wildfire! Brandon's voice shook with anger. Laughter echoed from the man held against the stone slabs. What have you done? The knight asked with rage in his voice. The sword he'd drawn pressed into the Baratheon's spine. Answer me. But like before, all he did was laugh. For Waller, Stannis all but whispered to the Stark men, begin the assault. Time skip. I understand my son's decision, but I feel like I should be down there. Cersei murmured as she poured a cup of wine. His uncle was allowed, but why was I not? He didn't want us hurt. Mother Tommen murmured softly. My prince, he did. Ser Delran nodded. He doesn't much trust the gold cloaks to do their job, so he had us as top captains of the Fox Company to guard you ourselves as much as your own Kingsguard do their duty. He felt it wouldn't be enough after our battles. We didn't want to take any risks. I know why he did it, Ser Delran. Cersei chuckled through an exasperated sigh. It's not so much why that bothers me, it's how it was done. Joffrey, even though he is king, was not allowed to sit in witness of the trial. I was not allowed. It begs one to wonder who rules the Seven Kingdoms, who truly sits on the Iron Throne. Tarina and Delran shared a pensive glance. Why King Joffrey? Of course, your grace. She took a slow-drawn breath, motioning a handmaiden to whisk Tommen away. She turned to the knight. Don't be coy, sir. Be honest. Do you believe Naruto would make a better king than Joffrey? It's not my place to decide, your grace. No, she hummed, but opinions exist nonetheless. Your queen has asked you a question. I would like to hear your answer, sir. I am a servant of the Prince Naruto, a servant of the House Baratheon. My opinions are worth nothing in the complex mire of politics, sir. Delran chuckled. I am nothing more than the sword your son directs, who sits on the Iron Throne. In all honesty, means little to me as long as I serve honorably and nobly. So you say that the Iron Throne doesn't matter? No, that is not what I meant, your grace. Delran shook his head. Though it would ease the heart if someone strong yet honorable sat upon that throne. Of course, Cersei hummed, pouring glasses of wine. Please, Lady Tarina. Lord Jalabar, Ser Andar, have a drink with me. Your queen requests it. Stepping from the shadows, the giant Summer Islander stepped forward, giving the woman a simple nod. Reaching down for a pair of cups, he handed one to the Asosi warrior woman. Clinking their goblets together, they took a sip in unison. Cersei hummed, drifting her finger across the rim of her own chalice. Tell me, Lord Jalabar, when your tenure in the Fox Company is over, do you intend to return to the Summer Islands? You would have the money and the support of the Iron Throne to retake your seat. The man gave Delran and Tarina a nervous glance. I haven't thought that far ahead, Your Grace, not in some time. My devotion and my attention has been poured into the Fox Company and serving your son, the Prince Naruto. Taking back the Summer Islands is more or less an afterthought, Cersei hummed, turning to the other knight among them, a newly anointed hedge knight. She asked pointedly, you Ser Andar of the Kingswood, you are, or at least were, the leader of your own little hedge knight band. You and your compatriots earned your knighthoods after striking down bandit tribes and raiders. You worked to bring a semblance of order in the wilderness of Westeros, and yet you were never given your dues. I imagine it must have been hard, men of your skill and stature forced to become no more than glorified cells. Words, we all do what we must to survive in these trying times, Your Grace. Ser Andar bowed his head. It was hard, but by the gods we were lucky to find ourselves in the capital. When the prince created his battle companions, where do you intend to go when the war is over? Cersei focused her gaze on the knight. I'm sure with the money you've earned over the course of this war from payment and plunder, your pockets must be the heaviest they have ever been. I only ask because I want to know where loyalties lie. As you said, in these trying times we must do what we must to survive, and for hedge knights you have survived well, I must say. Andar gave Delran and Jalabar nervous glances before turning back to the queen. I must admit, Your Grace, me and my compatriots have actually stopped asking for payment almost 6 months ago. To us, the Fox Company, our battle companions, the prince himself, are worth more than any silver stag one can offer. Easy platitudes to speak into existence, harder to put into practice. Cersei raised a brow. I have known honorable men my entire life. Some walk the halls, others decorate the parapets with their heads. It's difficult to quantify the worth of a man's honor. I must ask, what does honor mean to you, Ser? Why, Your Grace, Ser Delran reached out. I didn't ask you, Ser Delran, Cersei murmured. It was merely a harmless question. Surely that shouldn't warrant this kind of response. Please relax. I know you have been at war for a year and had seen things in your tenure in the field, but please, as your queen requests, we are here because my son decided what was best for his family's safety. Surely we could make this droll inconvenience a little lighter. Andar reached out, putting a hand on Delran's shoulder. It's all right, Delran, Your Grace. Yes, it is difficult to quantify a man's honor, but it isn't so hard to understand your son. She nodded, almost pleased with the response. Sipping at her wine once more, she whipped around. And what of you, Lady Tarina? What do you intend to gain after this war? Is one return to Essos? I would hope. The woman was quick to respond. Cersei, to her surprise, raised the wine bottle as if offering to refill her goblet. Delran and Jalabar gave her a worried look, their faces almost draining of color. With a nervous and shaking hand she reached out. Cersei began to pour, filling her goblet. I see, Cersei hummed, turning back on her heels, filling her chalice. She set the bottle down. Quick sips, no longer than a second. Tell me, who are you loyal to, my son, or the gold that fills your purse? My lady, if you asked me this before the war I would have said it was the money, Tarina answered, but after fighting this damn war and seeing the impossible things Prince Naruto has done, I truly believe there wouldn't be enough money in the world to make me turn away from him, nor the Fox Company. Cersei hummed cryptically. Once again, I think I am understanding the battle companions and the Fox Company a little better, though an interesting thought has occurred to me. All four of you have spoken of your loyalty and respect, even love for my son Naruto. You even claim loyalty to Fox Company, the very company you each had a hand in creating a year ago. I always heard from Robert the bond that soldiers make in war an unbreakable one that is forged in blood and tears. She turned to them suddenly, but it begs one to question, especially one as uneducated in war as myself, an undying loyalty to your brothers and sisters, of course, in arms. Do you somehow find a way to remain loyal to the Iron Throne, the very seat of power that charters your entire operation? Why, Your Grace, I do believe me when I say this. She turned to them, a stoic glance in her emerald eyes. I find it astonishing that a Summer Islander king, an anointed knight of the Greyjoy rebellion, a low-born hedge knight, and an Asosi beastmaster would find themselves together in the same kingdom, in the same company, under the same command of one of the most hated, most despised, most skilled of all the 7 kingdoms. My son, she sipped once more, turning back to the window sill. I want nothing but for the protection of my children. Naruto was disfigured, scarred, and thrown into war with nothing but the prayers for death by the High Septon and the courtiers of my own keep. My daughter has already been shipped off to Dorne. My other son is a monster who abuses his power like a madman. My last son, my youngest, is a child innocent of the cruelties of this world. I will burn this city to the ground if something were to happen to any of them, Joffrey included. No matter what slights he may have caused, I know that you have no reason to give Joffrey any ounce of your loyalty. But ensure that you keep your word that you have given me today, my son Naruto. I do not care what the rumors are that have circulated the kingdoms that he is a bastard. He isn't. He is the true-born son of Robert Baratheon. He is the true heir to the Iron Throne. Do not abandon him. Do not leave his side. You must not let him die. Am I understood? The four captains turned to one another, snapping to the queen. They slammed their fists against their chests. Understood, your grace. We will lay down our lives if we must. There was a harsh silence from the queen. Without warning, she stalked fearfully to the window. Sir Delran W. What is that? The knight stood beside the queen, hand on his sword and helmet held tight under his arm. Walking beside the queen, he rested a hand on the windowsill, gazing out into the distance. Black smoke rose into the sky as crimson flame, almost blood red, engulfed the weirwood of the only godswood in the south. The man had seen a lot, even the inferno of wildfire just a few weeks back, but he had never seen a fire so red nor so furious. The godswood, the man said in a near whisper. My son. Cersei dropped her wine glass. Now, your grace. The knight turned his gaze to the bay. I believe the Iron Fleet is needed. Looked to the narrow sea as if on cue. 20 ships began to breeze by past the mouth of the bay on either side, floating between the gaps. Slowly they raised the flaming heart banners of Dragonstone. How they got through without alerting their patrols out in the narrow sea, nor how they managed to reallocate their forces after such a crushing defeat so soon, was lost to the knight. He had seen the greatest fleet in Westeros diminish to nothing during the Greyjoy rebellion. He had seen greater armies with more disciplined soldiers never return in full force. This was something else. It had to be. Breaking from his reverie, he knew what needed to be done. Lady Tarina Delran turned quickly. Stay with the Queen. Jalabar. Sir, and are you two are with me? Raise the alarms and notify the Gold Cloaks and the Fox Company now. My queen, your son will return. I promise. See to it that he does, sir. Arya smirked, downing yet another trainee. Using her small stature to her advantage, she kicked and weaved, dodging untrained strikes and wild swings. The last of the 10 boys and men remained in front of her, a young boy, daft and yet bold, a dangerous mix that would make any man fall. Something Arya learned quick in King's Landing. All the fools she had come across, all the people she had killed and removed, some were at her sister's requests, others the queen herself had found reason for. It was simple thing, an important mission that she had found great talent for, but these whelps were pathetic in every possible way. Moving between wide strikes and overhead swings, she landed body strikes, underarm cuts and neck slices, leaving the recruits stunned, confused and annoyed. It didn't matter much to the Stark. They were weak to her as wooden swords clashed together as the sweat dribbled down their brows, bleeding into their thin linen tunics. She continued her onslaught until the final man was beaten into the training ground, nose shattered, blood dripping down his bearded cheeks. Very good, she said, tossing her blade away. It clattered on stone and sand. Reaching down, she pulled the man to his feet, letting him dust himself off before bowing quickly to the girl. He and his mates, all 10 of them, stumbled to their feet and fell back in line. While some of you were easy to put down, some of you had some mind for combat. I will say Lady Stark has fought and killed and is among the best of Fox Company. Sir Warren called, clapping his hands together. You would do well listening to what she has to say and following her commands. As the knight opened his mouth to speak, the words were trapped in his throat. It was just another day. At least it was supposed to be. The godswood that sat against the amphitheater was up in flames, the reddest fire he had ever witnessed. It screamed as it clawed its way, clinging to the curls and puffs of thick black smoke, choking the air of breath. The smoke peered and trickled, blotting the sky from view. Recruits took notice, quick spinning on their heels, gawking at the pillar of smoke. Arya paused, eyes wide with fear, as if a second sense had awoken in her. She ran toward the weapon rack, drawing needle whipping around her eyes. Slowly began to rise, hiding into her head. Within seconds, a bellowing howl hummed with the blowing of horns. A giant dire wolf, taller than herself, trotted into the training field, sliding across gravel until it snapped to the small Stark's side. Twirling her weapon, she waited, watching, sensing what was happening around her. Taking a second, she heard its swords, boots, armor, chainmail, the ringing and jingling tune of steel against steel. The violent song etched and marred as edge clanged to edge. A boy was shouting, "No!" A man, he bellowed, command, spat curses as he struck any who stood in his path down with fury. A woman had fallen to the stony floor, hands awash in fresh blood. Another, fair and brown-haired, fought with a storm of swords and wall of knives against a magical being. A boy, becoming a man, donned armor and a shield and shining shimmering sword, struck his enemies with practiced efficiency. 3 wolves were in the field, giant beasts, more than wolves. They fought beside their human companions, growling, snarling, chewing their way through the thickest of armors. A tigress hung back, guarding a beautiful queen. She shook her head. She was no longer seeing things from the ground. It was as if she had a bird's eye view of the palace grounds. Men climbed stone levees, men in ships Sailing into the Blackwater Bay, men dying in tended gardens, their flesh and blood feeding the viridian hedges and beautiful colorful flowers that bloomed. She shook her head, her mind burning and pounding with every waking second. Hedge knights of Fox Company drawing their swords, raising their shields, Brienne raising her horn once again, bellowing notes to the sky. She waited, it was coming, flipping back, arrows were deflected, while some zoomed past her, striking some recruits, killing them instantly. Twirling her blade as if gifted with precognition, she weaved and deflected, blocking the incoming projectiles. Twirling her sword, eyes still lodged back, she jabbed, needle's pointy end piercing through a levy's throat. A poke, a gurgle, a pained gasp. She pulled back, the sound of bubbling blood and mucus ringing in her ears. Arya twirled her small weapon once again, remembering the dancing moves of Syrio Farrell. Foot back, twirl, foot out, spin. She dodged a spear in her movements. Nymeria moved in teeth sinking into the shaft. Arya ducked beneath, sliding forward, gravel clicking between her boots as she shoved needle forward, piercing through leather jerkin and wool gambeson. A strange understanding as blood and gore spattered around her, as shields blocked arrows and sword as armor pierced by spearheads and tapering swords. She and Nymeria knew what they had to do. They moved as one, as they had never done before. Why am I learning this? Sansa questioned indignantly, a wooden sword wielding limply in her weak and undisciplined right hand. Syrio Farrell stood in front of her, gliding through movements, swinging and twirling his sword with magnificent skill. Sadly for the Lady of Stark, she didn't seem to notice. If she did, she simply didn't care all that much. What was the point? They weren't going to fight their way out of King's Landing. Only a fool or a suicidal fool would ever think such a task possible. She was neither of those things. Sansa, it's for your own protection, Arya said, following Farrell's movements to the T. The Queen's protection only extends so far. Without Bran or Naruto, we're on our own. Unlike these helpless handmaidens, I'm not going to sit back and let people walk over me. Arya, we're ladies of the court, we're prisoners. We're not going to get away with learning how to wield a sword. Enough with this. We can't do anything that will anger Joffrey, whether he leads his forces in Crack Claw Point or not. If he receives word that we're moving against his interests, doing anything that he doesn't like, I cannot let him hurt you. He will wish he could. Syrio hummed as he danced across the solar. Arya, following like a good disciple, matched his movements. Your father hired me to not only teach the young Arya how to dance, but to protect the two of you in any event that may require it. Thankfully her grace has decided the same. There is a reason I am still in the city and within this solar. My lady. Sansa frowned. She had given up too much. She dishonored herself. She claimed all of the pain she could possibly claim to keep her brother and sister away from Joffrey's plots and schemes. Away from the plots and schemes of the court. They were not welcome guests, they were prisoners, and the Queen, with all of her supposed power, lacked any real willpower to keep her demonic son in check. If no one would, she would give up her maidenhood. If she had to, she would throw herself at the king's feet and grovel, even as his Kingsguard beat her and humiliated her before the eyes of hundreds. It didn't matter as long as Arya was not harmed, as long as Bran returned to her alive and unharmed, as long as her family, what was left of it, what she could still protect, was safe. With a spiteful growl almost reminiscent to the dire wolf laying on a pillow, she raised her wooden sword. She felt stupid gliding across the floor, dragging the length of her dress with her. This is why you should wear breeches instead. Sansa choked, opening her eyes. The sound of struggle woke her from her pained slumber. Ice blue eyes locked with the empty brown of a dead man wearing orange armor. She gasped, rolling out from under the brush. She had to move quick. Footsteps rang around her, the shouts of commands, the crackle of flame eating at weirwood, and song of swords and deadly clash. Pushing off the floor, she swung about, sword in hand. The blade clashed with an incoming footman, redirecting, avoiding, and weaving between each strike and slash. She cut the man's head from his shoulders. Remembering her training with Myra and Naruto, she drew a dagger, whipping around, hurling the blade across the new battlefield against the stone merlins sitting against the levees. She moved, tearing her skirts, revealing leather breeches. Running to the parapet, she kicked another man from his ladder, watching him fall to the sand below. She didn't flinch as his head popped open like a grape. A presence turned behind her, raising her blade. In an instant she paused, eyes widening at the boy in front of her. Bran stood, hair slick against his face covered in blood. Sansa nearly screeched. It wasn't the blood that scared her, it was the steely ice blue eyes that stared back at her, empty and devoid of emotion, a kind soul lost behind the blur of blood and death. My baby brother, Sansa whimpered. My baby brother. He was no longer the child that could barely pull a bowstring back. He was no longer the boy who struggled to swing a sword. He was no longer the boy who would annoy her during supper, nor was he the boy that would ask her to read him bedtime stories when old Nan was nowhere to be found. He was a man scarred by conflict, scarred by battle, and reforged with skin like steel. But it was his eyes that horrified her. They were empty of the childlike joy she last remembered. They were dead. Sansa rolled her eyes as she leaned against the wooden railings of Winterfell's veranda, her sewing work held in her hands as she waited for her mother to finish watching over the boys with her father. Annoyance spread across Her face as Jon robbed Theon and Rickon laughed like madmen while Bran as per usual struggled to hit bullseye much less draw his bowstring back. Rolling her eyes once again she watched as Arya from the side complained and whined against her tutor's wishes. She could not understand the appeal. Men and their swords and their arrows and their fighting. Where was the end to this pointless savagery? Lifting her dress she fell back sitting on a barrel as undignified as she felt it was. She was a lady and this was so unladylike it would make her puke. Sweat down their brows, dirt on their cheeks, bruises and cuts on their calloused hands. Where was the beauty in it? It was disgusting, dirty, uncouth. Bran groaned as another arrow completely missed its target. Robb giggled, Jon chuckled, Rickon nearly fell from the saddle sitting on its post. Even Arya somehow found it amusing to Sansa. However, it was a mistake and a sign that maybe Bran was not cut out for the life of a soldier. Maybe he could get better if he tried more, but if he wasn't good at it from the start there was no point looking down at her threadwork. She was told that she was a natural. Everything she did, everything she put her mind to, she perfected it. Being a lady from curtsies to even pouring wine whenever she was given a task, she ensured that did it to the best of her abilities. But there was something that just spoke to her when it came to needles and thread. It was a certain refinement that very few things gave. However, through her musings Bran had his bow taken from him by Robb. She watched her eldest brother as he knocked an arrow with expert grace. She watched as the man pulled the bowstring back, barely flexing his muscles. As he released it the arrow flew across the field and pierced just within the second ring. Bran stared with sparkles in his eyes as if it were the most magnificent thing he had ever seen in his life. Theon however was unimpressed, balking about his lack of grace and refinement, something Sansa couldn't comprehend. The way he drew the bow, the way he shot his arrow, it looked fine to her. It certainly looked fine to Bran. Theon walked to Robb, taking the bow from the Stark's hands and knocked an arrow. It was almost an art, the knock, the pull and draw. The Greyjoy went on talking about how the Greyjoy's real talent came from archery. She rolled her eyes, unable to listen any longer. Jon rolled his eyes. Robb stifled his laugh. Bran shrugged his shoulders. She shook her head. She didn't give a damn about his family nor of the Iron Islands and their supposed talents to her. To them, even if they didn't say it out loud, had no love or respect for the raiding, raping, pillaging savages. Seeing that the crowd was dead to his self-praises, Theon grunted, looking away from the target. Releasing the bowstring she watched as the arrow snapped forward, cutting through the air and piercing through the center of the bullseye. Tossing the bow back to Bran, Theon walked to Rickon leaning on another wooden post, giving them a condescending smirk. She shook her head, taking a shaking breath. Theon went on again, talking about the Greyjoys, the Iron Islands and archery, all of it going in one ear and out the other. Standing in the center of their gazes, Bran turned, looking at his brothers, looking to his sister's brown eyes locked with her ice blues. He was nervous, he was afraid. He wasn't a soldier, he wasn't a little lord either, he was her baby brother. She blinked, watching him twirl his blade. Raising his shield he charged ahead, hitting a man from the levee walls as another scaled over the Merlin. Bran raised his sword, bringing it down through the man's head, splitting his skull in two. Bran shouted, shoving his shield into the dead man's face. Watching as the corpse careened to the sandy shores below, turning back around, the boy threw himself back into combat, striking, killing, defending. Please. Sansa fell to her knees, bruises on her back, blood trickling down her brow. She looked up to the Iron Throne, shadows cut and light splitting between the swords of the great seat. Joffrey sat upon it, smirking as his Kingsguard beat her with wooden swords. She trembled, shaking as she wept and sobbed before the court. I'm begging you, your grace, my lady, your father is a traitor, my brother is a traitor. Joffrey glared, hand caressing a pommel sticking out the armrest. That would make you, your sister and your brother traitors as well. I swear to you, your grace, we knew nothing of their traitorous sentiments. I swear, Sansa pleaded. I know my father betrayed you, I know Prince Naruto betrayed you, but my sister, my brother had no hand in this. Murmurs spread among the courtiers who stood in fear and sympathy. Sansa hissed between teeth as she looked behind her. They could save their pity, they were too craven to do anything about it. How can I trust you, any of you who was promised to? Then she bowed her head. Please, to ease the tension between our families, they cannot and will not go to war with the house I am married to, bound by blood. If you were to marry me, we could avoid a war, we could end the bloodshed before it begins. Joffrey gave her a confused look as if contemplating her words. The Kingsguard suddenly backed away from her, taking their place at the base of the throne steps. Courtiers whispered, once again gawking at her claim. Sansa clenched her teeth. She didn't have much but herself to offer. She couldn't let this madman hurt her siblings like he had already hurt their father and her love. She couldn't sit back and do nothing. I do not fight like my brother, I do not have the courage of my sister, but I am still a lady of noble birth. Sansa continued, I was once promised to you, your grace, as king. You can make it so once again. Do you expect me to believe you would betray my brother's love? Joffrey asked her, standing from the throne. He descended the steps with a serious glare. She bit her lip. Naruto's smile, their first awkward encounter, the kidney Pies they had in taverns across King's Landing, the crown of flowers he placed on her head after the tourney of the hand, the picnics they had in the gardens, the books they read together, the favors she'd sewn for him, his sapphire eyes, tears prickling, stinging like needles against her sclerae. She looked back up to Joffrey with a fierce look in her eye. "Forgive me, Naruto, I cannot hold love for a monster, much less a traitor." "Courtiers," whispered once again. This time Joffrey's frown twitched, turning into a sickening smile. "Say that again." "I didn't hear you, Prince Naruto." She shut her eyes, memories of the things they had done searing into her thoughts. "Is a monster, he is a demon. He lied to me, he lied to my sister, my brother too, he lied to all three of us. We only did as we were led to believe by not just him, but our traitorous father as well. I could never love him, none of us could." She flinched as a hand cupped her chin, carefully opening her eyes. "Ice blue came to meet emerald green, my lady. As King of the Seven Kingdoms, I will marry you. Only through my grace and my crown will you be safe." "What of my brother and sister?" Sansa asked meekly. "If it pleases." Joffrey gave her a smile. "I will protect them too. I will ensure their safety and ensure that your father and my brother are sufficiently punished for what they've done, tainting your honor with this treason." She glared through watering eyes. Bran threw himself forward, rolling across the stone slabs, swinging out, cutting legs at the knees. Killing men older and far more skilled than he was getting tired, but she was locked in her own body. There she stood, no matter how many kills, how much skill she had gained. She was once again a damsel in distress. "A lady, let me ask you, my lady." Joffrey turned to her. She sat in a chair before him, the very same that she had seen Cersei sit in when she spoke to King Robert. Unlike the love in their eyes, she and Joffrey looked to one another with nothing but hatred. He sat in his chair playing with a knife as Ser Trant stood over her with that hateful sneer he always wore. He looked down on her like she were a beaten dog. To some that may have been the case, a beaten wolf, more like it. She thanked the gods old knew any that lady was nowhere near them, staying with the queen and her siblings. She held her gaze, keeping her eyes forward as more Kingsguard filled the room, standing over her like starved animals waiting for a meal, hands on their swords, fists clenched closed. She waited, feeling their breath on her hair, their presence like a monolith of stone and steel looming over her. Joffrey waited, his green eyes trailing from night to night. Rising from his seat, he snapped to her, pointing a figure accusingly. "My uncle Jaime was captured by your brother a week before the execution of your father." Joffrey began. "The Battle of the Whispering Wood, where your brother murdered thousands of good men. You never did give me an answer for your crimes, please." Sansa took a slow deep breath. "I Ser Meryn," she's struggling for words. "Help her." Sansa's skin turned cold as the gloved hand rested on her shoulder. The anointed knight, who held no loyalty to his vows and oaths, turned her head to look at him, a dark lecherous gleam in his cold eyes. He punched her as she recoiled back. Another night. Ser Boros Blunt held her still, forcing her upright from her split lip. Blood trickled to her chin as she returned her gaze to the king. A snicker came from the other Kingsguard who stood behind them, forcing her upright. A slap cracked across her cheek, blackening her already bruised face. Still she said nothing, keeping a stoic expression as Joffrey turned to face her. Joffrey winced with a disgusted look. "This won't do. Look at you, you're no longer pretty. I have been in King's Landing the entire time, your grace. Me and my siblings had nothing to do with what our traitorous brother had done. I am a stupid girl who thought my father and Naruto could live their days taking the black. I was wrong to think any leniency could be given to my treasonous blood, but I would never do the same to you. My brother and sister would never. As long as I am at your side, we will never cross you." "And how do I know that's the truth?" Joffrey questioned. "After I went out of my way to extend my hand, my royal prerogative, to protect you and your traitorous family. This is how you northern savages repay me. I would never betray you, your grace." Sansa lowered her head in shame. "I have not and will not forget the kindness you have shown us. You agreed to protect my sister and brother. As long as I submit myself to you, I have, and I will continue to do so as long as they remain breathing." Joffrey laughed, walking around the table, giving a quick wave of his hand to his Kingsguard. The knights backed away immediately. He walked to her, cupping her chin with his hands just as he had done in the throne room a week prior. His green eyes softened as he looked at her. "Ser Meryn, if you hit her face again, I will have your hand removed. I told you before, leave her face. I like her pretty, your grace." The knight stammered. "I apologize, dog." Joffrey turned to Sandor Clegane. "I think it's fitting that you, with your own removed hand, that you should do the honors. As Ser Island removes tongues, you shall remove hands. My lady, rise, walk with me." Sansa choked in his tenderness. Rising as he commanded, he led her to the balcony of his personal Solar Kingsguard. Hanging close, they watched, ever slightly waiting for the most minute hint of treason. Sansa reined herself, knowing that if she died there was nothing going to stop these monsters from killing Bran or doing worse to Arya. She could not let that happen. Looking to Joffrey, he would gift her to his Kingsguard if it amused him. She didn't care. She had already decided. With every death, every betrayal, every lie spat in her face, and every lie she had to speak between clenched teeth, the beatings, the humiliations, the curses, and the doubts, she waited, standing there beside the king, the boy that at One point she claimed to love at first sight. Now looking down to the courtyards below, she was tempted, ready to throw him over the railing, but she couldn't. She had to wait, she had to bide her time. If he disrespected her, soiled her honor, she didn't care as long as Arya was away from the gazes and the greasy hands of lecherous men, and Bran wasn't thrown into a dungeon to suffer the same torture of her once beloved Naruto. She couldn't act out of turn, she couldn't have the queen hate her too. She needed what allies she could gain in any way she could. Holding her breath, she waited for the king to speak. "I can only do so much to protect your siblings," Joffrey hummed. "Everyone, even those on the small council, want them dead. Your brother more so. Arya is still poised to wed my brother Tommen, and you were once poised to marry my brother. I know you claim that your insight matters little, but if you are to be my queen, I will see to it that you are held as my equal." "Your grace," Sansa murmured, "this isn't real. It couldn't be. I am creating a royal army," Joffrey said. "An army that doesn't follow the whims of lords, but follows me. My own mother stood in my way recently, cursed me, and struck me in front of my subjects. I cannot allow treason. My own betrothed, you betrayed me as well." "Your grace." Wait. Sansa paled at his changing tone, as if something changed at a moment's notice. He was a different boy from the tender kindness he had displayed mere seconds before. "Please, if it pleases my brother is still a lord. Put him in the royal army, have him serve." "Interesting," Joffrey hummed. "I was thinking of doing the same to my brother Naruto." Sansa blinked, her heart raced, her muscles tensed. The sight of ice swinging down on her father's neck, the same prince she loved, the same prince that took her across the city sightseeing and riding horses on the outskirts, the same prince had swung the Valyrian steel sword of their house, executing her father. In that moment she didn't care what her father said, she didn't care if there wasn't a choice. Her love, the man she had seen her whole future with, had swung the sword. She said in a near whisper, "You say your brother should live." Joffrey hummed. "Who better to lead him in battle than my brother? You saw him that day. He killed many on his own. Who's safer than at his side? If your brother stayed here, it wouldn't be long before, how do I say, accidents happen." Her eyes widened. "Save yourself for me, my lady." Joffrey reached up, caressing her cheek with a familiar tenderness. "I will be leading a personal battalion of the royal army into Crackclaw Point to battle my uncle Stannis. I will return by the time you have your blood. Once that happens, I will put a child in you. Believe me, this isn't because I love you, nor do I care for you. However, my brother does, and I'm going to make sure to make this the greatest insult I can think of." As he walked away, he stopped mid-step, turning to her. "You have my word, your brother will leave with mine to his personal keep, Fort Highgarde. Take this as a chance to reign your sister. When I return, I hope to find you waiting in my chambers. Am I understood? The safety of your brother and sister depends on it." Sansa blinked. Bran fell back, sword pressed against his shield. Sansa could not move. Her brother rolled away, shooting his blade up, sheathing his sword into the man's chest. As they both fell over, he panted, pulling his weapon free. He turned to her once again, dark brown eyes burning with rage and fury. The shadows of battle scarred across his vision, blood flaked and slaked across his brown auburn hair. He was not the child who struggled to pull a bowstring. He was not the boy who screamed and cried at the September of Baylor. He was not the child who she gave everything she had to protect. They didn't look at her. She stood there in the foyer, wearing her elaborate dress that she had sewn herself, the breeches stained with blood of her victim hidden underneath. Arya at her side had donned a similar dress, hiding her leather breeches as well. Fox Company, the great commanders of the already legendary fighting force of the royal army, marched past, courtiers at the head. Naruto stood tall, his whisker scars unmistakable, but the boy beside him was nearly unrecognizable. Bran was taller, bulkier, with his hair tied back into a ponytail. He had a small scar over his right eyebrow stretching into his temple. He had almost no resemblance to the small child that left these halls a year before. While she and Arya had their own share of killing, as Robb fought a war, as Jon undoubtedly fought the wildlings north of the wall, it sickened her to her stomach that they all had blood on their hands. The things he must have seen, the things he and Naruto had done. She only had songs and whispers from courtiers. She followed after them, as did everyone else, the knights of the battle companions, hedge knights, the Lady Tarina and her terrifying tigress Lady Sorsha, the towering Summer Islander Prince Jalabar Ho, and the newcomer, a towering woman in bronze-colored armor and short, cropped blonde hair. They moved together, blood still fresh on their armor and clothing, swords clattering at their sides. Still she followed, her heart racing with every careful step. Nearing the throne room, Naruto kicked the door open immediately. Followed by Bran, she watched with wide eyes as Bran drew his bow, knocking an arrow and unleashing it within seconds, almost lightning fast. He knocked another and another, unleashing a hailstorm before her eyes, never once missing his mark. Summer, the great direwolf, had also grown in size, charging for a royal army soldier, denting his armor. The battle companions fanned out, cutting down soldiers who dared to stand in their way. Joffrey, however, rose shakily from his seat, daring to draw his sword to her. Surprised Bran knocked another arrow and launched it before anyone could say anything. The arrow flew across the throne room, ricocheting off of Joffrey's sword. The king retracted quickly, only to be suddenly grabbed by Naruto with a quick throw. The king flew from the Iron Throne and toppled to the floor below. Kingsguard drew their swords only to meet the blades tempered in blood and fire of his battle companions. Before Joffrey could sit up, Summer was over him, snarling and frothing at the mouth. Pressing his giant paw on the king, Joffrey whimpered, trying to crawl away. The small council had arrived, horrified looks on their faces, but there was little they could do with the battle companions holding those who had any semblance of fighting skill at blade point. Sansa stepped into the throne room with Arya in tow, red-faced at the sight. Naruto and Bran looked at them, sapphire and brown locking with ice blue and silver. Bran's eyes followed, noticing the blood on Sansa's cheek, the bruise almost completely healed on Arya's forehead, tucked away behind her hair. There was a silent conclusion that spread across his face, as if something awoke in the boy. He pushed Naruto aside and pushed Summer away before Joffrey could move. Bran threw himself over the king, throwing punches with deft precision. "What did you do to my sisters?" Bran bellowed wildly, wrapping his hands around Joffrey's throat. A Kingsguard drew his sword with a quick movement. Ser Warren dragged his blade across the Kingsguard's throat, spilling his blood on the throne room floor. Screams and gasps shrieked across the Red Keep. People whispered, people cried out, but they were quickly silenced by Naruto's deafening bellow. Picking up Joffrey, Naruto shoved his fist into the king's stomach, pushing him to Bran, who quickly kicked the royal as he stumbled toward the scarred prince. Naruto shoved his elbow into the king's cheek, sending him back to the floor. Another Kingsguard drew his sword, only for Lady Tarina to shove her scimitar into the man's chest. "Don't do anything stupid." Kingsguard Ser Delran held his sword out. "Any one of you idiots draw your sword again, we will kill all of you." Another Kingsguard drew his weapon and was immediately skewered by Ser Warren. People screamed, crying out with terror, kicking the dead knight from his spear. The clanging of armor, the spreading of blood matching the other dead Kingsguard. The throne room was silent once again. Taking initiative, Bran punched Joffrey, leaving him open for Naruto. The prince moved it next, kicking the king to the ground. Bran grabbed Joffrey, pulling back with all his strength, shoved his gauntlet into Joffrey's face. The king cowered on the floor, spitting up blood and bile as he cringed into his small body, rolling about the floor. The crown had long since fallen from his head, laying haphazardly at the foot of the Iron Throne. Turning on his heels, the prince walked to the seat, lifting the circlet, sitting horrified but relieved. His mother was beside the seat, sporting her own bruised mother. Naruto said, "Did Joffrey do this?" She said, "Nothing, uncle." Naruto turned to the hand. "I thought you would have more control of the situation in King's Landing. To allow the king to harm his own mother, our queen regent, is a crime in of itself. To allow him to harm the Starks, his own betrothed's family, is another crime. We did what we could." Tyrion said, "Ever since he had returned from Crack Claw Point, he has turned more cruel and unpredictable. Then there's no need for you." Bran growled, "Fox Company has returned to King's Landing." Naruto nodded. "I will be taking control of the city." "Joffrey, you useless shit, you can keep your throne and your crown, but do not mistake me. I am the power in this city, not you. I just want you to know, Joffrey, if you dare to raise a sword at me and mine, I will take that crown and your life. We are not your playthings. No one this kingdom nor this keep, and especially not in Fox Company." Bran held his sword at the king's throat. Sansa was certain that the temptations and intrusive thoughts telling him to end the bastard right then and there were louder than the cries of courtiers, however unveiling restraint that anointed knights didn't have. He sheathed his blade and ran to his sisters. His brown eyes were empty, dark, cold, dead. Sansa bit her lip as the tears welled in her eyes. "My baby brother, what have I done?" Sansa. Bran shouted, "Wake up." She shook her head, snapping out of her surprise. She grabbed the boy, pulling him in for a quick hug. "Bran, what happened?" Naruto was about to kill Stannis, but soldiers appeared out of nowhere, started killing nobles across the stands. The hand managed to escape with the Lord Commander of the Gold Cloaks, but Naruto, he was caught in the middle of the fight with what little soldiers and guards remain in the amphitheater. They came out of nowhere and with the godswood on fire. It's caused confusion in the arena, Naruto, and I cleaned up most of the soldiers there, but there are more coming over the levees and moving toward the godswood, Naruto, and I split up from there." Sansa. She moved aside as if a second sense had taken over her. Sliding to the side, she watched as Bran raised his sword, shooting forward with a swift half-step. Shooting his blade forward, it dug into a man's chest, exiting out the back next to him. Sansa drew a pair of knives, snapping her arm out, hurling a flurry of blades in the opposite direction, killing men a few feet back, their bodies collapsing to the floor in unison. Sansa gasped, raising her blade once more. "Sansa, get out of here." Bran said, "Find Arya and get to Maegor's Holdfast. Find the queen and the Prince Tommen and get to safety, Naruto. And I know that you four are the most important people in the entire city. Stannis will undoubtedly target you four. Hold Tommen hostage, ransom you the queen and Arya, that is if he gets to them first, you know." What his troops will do if they catch you unaware, Bran. I will kill every man I see if they get their hands on you. Sansa, his voice low and filled with malice. I will slake these grounds with blood if they harm you too. I am not some lady who must sit in a tower waiting for a knight in shining armor to save her. Sansa twirled her sword. No, you're not. Bran grabbed her forearm. You're my sister. She blinked at his words. Because I'm your sister, your oldest sister. I am not going to be sent away. I am fighting by your side as I should have a year ago. Sansa, Bran hissed. These men aren't just going to kill you. I can't let that happen, and having me wait in some tower will keep me safe. She pushed back. I had to sit and hide when they attacked the first time. I'm no going to let you bleed in my place again. I have given all I have to give to protect you and Arya, just as Naruto had. Do not let my sacrifices be in vain. Before he could respond, they moved as one, letting a spear come between them. She swung back, her blade going over it and Bran's going under. His sword cut through the spearman's knees, while Sansa's went through his neck. The pieces of what once was a dragonstone levee fell into thirds, toppling over his pieces, poising their weapons. Once more they took notice of squads scaling levees and walls, spilling into the gardens down the way. There were nearly 20 of them, already drawing their swords and raising their shields, and that cursed flaming heart banner, readying themselves. They shared a glance. Bran, we have to use our powers, she said in a near whisper. We have to. Sansa, Bran's anger dissipating in an instant. I don't, Naruto, and I spoke about it. He said we had to hide my powers until the time is right. Now's not the time to hide. Sansa glowered, irises shooting up into her head, revealing nothing but the whites of her eyes. The only thing we can do is fight. Bran watched her as she shot forward, clashing her blade against an unsuspecting dragonstone levee before he could overpower her. A gigantic direwolf dug its head into the man's side, snapping his spine and sending him over the stone levee, whipping around as if she were in a trance. Lady moved at her side, keeping men off of her as she moved. The ice blues of her irises never showed. He took a deep breath, shaking as he exhaled. Eyes shot into his head as if the world had opened up to him. Summer arrived, throwing himself into the next squad that crossed over the levee. Back to back with his sister, they moved in unison, striking at men who left themselves open while their direwolves closed the distance. Gigantic, beautiful beasts moved like blurs. Despite their size, no one could touch them. No one would ever hurt them again. Myra had faced a lot of things. Ashai shinobi, unsullied slave soldiers of Essos, brave men of the Flowery Reach, the mighty lions of the Westerlands, and even the flaming hearts of the Dragonstone host. But she had never faced this. Pulling from an auxiliary brace belted to her back, she hurled knives across the flaming godswood, ensuring that she kept a distance away from the Red Woman. To her surprise, as the daggers closed the distance, the woman simply raised a hand with flickering flame around her. The knives bounced off of her as if she were covered in an invisible aura. With every clang and clash, flames exploded, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. Myra moved, sliding across the godswood grounds, knives rearmed and wielded. She stabbed a dragonstone man at arms in his knee as he toppled over. She used the other, shoving it into the man's chin, tearing the blade free. She snapped her arm out, hurling the weapon in the air, hoping to strike at the Red Witch and catch her unaware. As the knife bounced off of her shield, Myra focused her energy within her body, chakra burning wild from her pores and through her body. Remembering the training she had learned in her life, she imbued her latent energy into her movements. Charging forward, she clashed with Melisandre, who simply stood there unmoving, undaunted and unafraid of what was to come. With every swing and punch, Myra was thrown back, toppling over herself, clashing wildly with the walls surrounding the godswood. Why are you doing this? Myra spat, throwing her knives once more. A pair of levies fell to the floor, blades protruding from their necks. How are you doing this? The Lord of Light has gifted me with many great powers, young bastard, Melisandre called ominously. With the burning of the weirwood, those powers only grow. Reaching back, she snapped her arm forward, screaming incantations in High Valyrian, swinging an arm out. A pillar of white and red flame sprang from the suffering weirwood and careened toward Myra. The girl rolled to the side, dodging the wild flame. Reaching to the brace on her back, she cursed, finding that she had just used the last of her knives. Another pillar of flame was compressed and hurled toward her once again. Using the momentum, she rolled out of the way, grabbing knives from the corpses that littered her surroundings. With all the weapons laid at her feet, the flickering flames simply reflected, blinding against the silvery edges. One throw, two. She moved under the flurry of flame and the storm of blades flipping around. Chakra burned through her muscles, through the coils that she had come to learn. She had landing on one foot. She danced, twirling around an incoming bolt of flame. She repositioned, stumbling over her feet. If only I knew the techniques of the ancient shinobi. Damn it all to hell, this woman. She's using fire as if it's an extension of herself. Those incantations she's spouting, it sounds less like a chant and more like the name of a spell. I have a question for you, young bastard, Melisandre called. Why do you serve that prince? Don't you know that you were never destined to be together? What the hell would you know of destiny? Myra stepped into the Red Keep for the first time, a child stolen from the grime and mud of Flea Bottom. This great keep, in its towering heights and holdfasts, always looked down on her from her derelict district, dirt scrawled across her face in the poor peasant's dress she wore at her side. Her sister Catherine shambled along at the behest of their new masters, rather bosses. They were deemed good enough to work the kitchens and serve the Red Keep and the staff that ran it. As they stepped into the great foyers and the towering chandeliers that dangled ever higher, their eyes followed every flickering shadow and whipping flame, from candles to the torches burning in their sconces and the braziers that seemed to never douse the darkness. It was then that she saw him, a young boy, blonde-haired, sapphire-eyed, running with a pair of children at his sides. Behind them another, a blonde with green eyes, shouted commands, barking at the giant behind him. The older boy cursed and screamed, but the younger with blue eyes laughed and giggled with the smaller children. He lifted them in his arms and rushed across the foyer grounds, boots and leather soles slamming and clapping against granite tiles, winds drifting against tapestries and artwork hanging so slightly from the red walls of the great keep. As the boy passed, he whisked the children along, ignoring the incessant cries of the older boy. He stopped beside her, taking her hand into his own. "I'm Prince Naruto Baratheon. Who are you?" he asked with a vibrant, toothy grin. "I am Myra Waters." She choked her response. "Oh, you must be the ones the kitchen staff was talking about," Naruto cried. "I hope to see you more around the castle." Myra, she watched him run off. She blinked. Just like that, several years had passed, and now, instead of working and slaving away in the kitchens to feed the lavish feasts her king threw every month, slaving away cutting up boars and venison of her king's hunts that he threw every month, or simply feeding the forces that ran the daily maintenance of this magnificent keep, she sat before the queen herself within a private solar. In the gardens of the Red Keep she remained head lowered before the beautiful Lannister. Myra, was it Cersei asked with a condescending tone. "I see that you are spending more of your time with my son Naruto." She paled at the queen's words. I apologize if I offended your grace. I will cease and keep my distance if it pleases. I just can't go back to Flea Bottom. I do not remember asking for a story. Bastard. Cersei sipped her wine. "No, you will not cease your actions with my son. Rather, I want you to continue what you're doing. You and your sister Catherine, I believe, have proven yourselves as hard workers. After all, you and your sister hear things within these halls kept in the kitchens as nothing more than witless wenches with no worth or value. That is your strength, isn't it? You hide your intentions." I don't know what you mean, your grace. Don't be coy." Bastard. Cersei chuckled, refilling her chalice. "Tell me, when you heard of those knights that intended to betray the delegation of House Tyrell, did you do it of your own volition, or was it some sick sense of loyalty to the crown that doesn't even really know that you exist, or was it something else? Truly, I want to know. It's not often that a bastard can just leave Flea Bottom and find themselves in the thick of all the gossip and whispers of the Red Keep. Your grace, I swear I only did my duty as a citizen of the Seven Kingdoms and a citizen of this city." Myra bit her lip. "Curious, in the years you have worked within the Red Keep, have you ever had contact with the cockless worm Lord Varys?" Cersei questioned. Myra shook her head. "And no, your grace, I only know of him by the whispers that pass through the kitchens and the halls when I pass by. I swear it, I see." Cersei hummed, dragging the pad of her fingertip around the chalice. "So you're saying you have no employer?" "None but the staff of the Red Keep, your grace." "Then you serve me now?" Cersei nodded. "Go to Flea Bottom, head to that orphanage where you were whisked away. You will speak to my contact Hardin. You are going to report back to him on the happenings of the lords who pass through these halls, but anything that happens to my son Naruto you report back to me, and only me. Am I understood?" Myra blinked, Melisandre's question beating at her like a hammer. "I serve because I must." "You serve a lie." Myra ran from the dungeon, sweat trickling down her brows. Holding her head, she rushed to her private chambers and collapsed to the stone floor, her chest tightening and contracting. She couldn't breathe. Head pressed against stone and wooden walls, she could hear the banging of drums, the blowing of horns, and the beating of chests as men and women chanted for the death of her beloved prince. She could hear the cries of Sansa as she was beaten in the throne room. She could hear the cries of babes in the streets as heralds cried out for the death of the boy called a monster, a demon. Hands twitching, the blood on Naruto's face fresh on her own hands, the empty gaze he gave her, the weak and broken pride of Lord Stark as they wallowed in the deepest pit of the dungeon. She shook her head, quivering in her leather clothes, shivering in her own shame. It was her fault, all of it. She spied on Naruto, she spied on the Starks, she caused all of this, giving the one person who should never be given the power of information all that he needed to take control. Hands pressed to her forehead, she sobbed, teeth clenched tight. As she nearly bit her tongue, she waited, pressing her back against the door. No one would find her, no one cared to search for her. Catherine had left on assignment. Hardin was in the throne room whispering lies into the false king's ears, all because of her. Blinded by the tears welling in her chocolate orbs, she hissed, drawing a knife from a leather brace. She shot to her feet, grabbing the door handle. She was going to end this farce once and for all. It didn't matter if it was her hands that were stained With royal blood, if she could save Naruto and Lord Stark, save his family, save the royal children and the queen, she would do it. As the door swung open, she listened as Sansa's sobs echoed through the empty halls of the Red Keep, harrowing, deafening. It was as if she were being tortured in sight of the entire court. Myra's anger rose, bubbling with rage and fury. She marched ahead, eyes focused forward. She was going to die this day, and she was going to make sure that she made up for her mistakes. She endangered innocent lives. She endangered the life of the man she loved. She spied for the wrong people willingly, and now the consequences of her foolishness were dealt to one who didn't deserve it. A pair of nameless gold cloaks rushed to her, holding out their hands, speaking unintelligible words, speaking demands that she had no intent of following. She didn't think, seeing nothing but the tunnel vision of her fury. She marched forward, swinging her knife, cutting their throats out. The two of them fell to their knees, gagging and choking as blood spilled between their fingers. She continued walking, a harsh march through the grand foyer into the great throne room and the cursed iron throne that awaited within. The closer she came, Sansa's screams grew, her pleads begging. No one moved to protect her as Joffrey laughed maniacally, ordering Ser Meryn about the anointed knight she saw condescendingly spit his commands to passing servants of the Red Keep. She always knew he was a worthless rat to strike girls and ladies, was unbecoming of a true knight. Just as she rested her hand on the door, she heard it. He's a monster. He's a demon. Myra's face drained of color, her heart nearly came to a shuddering halt. I could never love her. Him falling back, she dodged a flurry of fire bolts flipping around. Once more she dragged a knife against the ground, kicking up dirt and debris as she threw the knife. As the cloud grew, the knife was hidden. To her surprise, brown eyes widened, watching as the knife went through the invisible shield and nicked Melisandre's cheek. The small line and the droplet of blood trickling down her porcelain face was more than enough. You know nothing, which Myra hissed. Oh, Melisandre chuckled again. Tell me then, what is it that I do not know? As if you're going to stand there and let me speak. Myra rolled about the burning godswood, grabbing knives as she repositioned herself, finally finding a pattern in Melisandre's movements. She cut through firebolts and pillars of flame. Great balls shot forward, smashing against the wall fence of the godswood, only to curl and dissipate as if it followed another barrier. Whipping around, she cut once more, slicing through the incoming flame. Myra sat against the wall of the dank dungeon, chained to a wall and bound at her wrists and ankles. She waited, watching as the sun rose and set outside, with the lights peering between cracks and the steel grates that hovered above her head. The only solace she had hoped to gain. Chains rattled, whistles were sung as bandits and deserters they had caught across the Crownlands were trapped and chained together with her. They sat murmuring dark and threatening words, curses that would make even a silent sister cry out in fear. They wanted to rape her badly, a woman alone in a cell filled with men who haven't felt the sun on their faces in weeks. It was a recipe for disaster, but she knew it was the least of what she deserved. After everything she had done, after everything she had caused, this punishment was mild. She sighed, pressing her head to the wall, pulling her rags together to hide as much skin as she possibly could, careful not to drift too close to the other bars. More prisoners frothed at the mouth like rabid dogs, barking at her like animals, their sickly, bloody, blackened with mud hands poked through as far as they could manage as their cuffs and chains chafed against their wounded flesh. They whistled, called her a whore, asked her what price she charged. Others laughed, pulling their burlap breeches down, shaking their cocks at her, stroking themselves, hoping she'd notice. Alone in the dark, alone under their cruelty, she turned her eyes up to the culvert, staring between the grates. The moon shone bright. A new month had started just as a hand-bloodied fingertips grazed against her unkempt brown hair. The dungeon doors shuddered open. The bandits cried out, shuffling back and forth as distinct marching echoed throughout the dark dungeon. She watched carefully as 20 crossbowmen of the Fox Company, their orange armor unmistakable, took positions against her cell, and the others. Bandits cried out, shouting threats and roaring like animals, once again grabbing their bars, chains and cuffs, chafing and tearing skin from their wrists. They shook about, shrieking. As quickly as the crossbowmen arrived, they pulled their triggers. Bandits fell around her, bolts embedded in their foreheads, between their eyes and in their throats. Those that survived were speechless. That moment of silence quickly turned to wild screams, rolling in the blood of their friends and fellow criminals, begging for mercy. The crossbowmen said nothing as they wrenched their strings back and reloaded, aiming the weapons between the bars. They fired once more, bandits, and their cries growing more silent with every shot fired, until there was nothing but death surrounding her. Alone with nothing but the spotlight of the moon, she shivered. One by one the cells opened, and levies of the Fox Company dragged the corpses out. Before she could say anything, a levy walked to her, emptying a bucket of ice-cold water onto her, drenching her head to toe. Ice-cold steel chains, ice-cold heavy rags, her hair sticking to her skin. She shivered, shuddering, as cold breezes rushed in with the stench of death. No words were shared as the levies simply turned their backs to her. Another came to her, emptying another water bucket, splashing it across her face. As the last of the bodies were removed, the cell slammed shut, and The keys locked it shut. There she remained, this time alone, not a bandit to see, not a criminal to hear, not the frothing sneers of hateful men. She was lone in silence beneath the moon looming above, closing her eyes, tears hot and salty spilled down her cheeks. She should have never come here, she should have just done her task and killed that bastard king. As darkness seeped into her mind, a hand rested on her shoulder, forcing her from her sleep. Myra, Naruto said, sitting on an overturned bucket. You look terrible. Smacking her lips, she was surprised at how split and dry her lips were. Her hair was stiff, sticking out in all directions, her skin coarse and rough, dry, and the clothes she wore crinkled and crawling with insects. She remained leaning against the stone wall, as she had for how many days she did not know. Licking her lips, she coughed, choking at how dusty and dry her throat was. Water, he asked, lifting a ladle of water. Myra could only nod her head, leaning as far as her neck cuffs would allow. She slurped, lapping at the ice-cold water. She panted, coughing once again. She said nothing, and neither did Naruto. He lifted another ladle once more, letting her drink and gulp to her heart's content. As the last of the water dripped between her teeth and trickled down her face, she sighed, falling back against the stone wall. Silent as before, they stared at one another, unable to find the words to say. She could already guess what he was thinking. She couldn't blame him either. She was just a kitchen wench, yet he knew nothing of things she had done. The information she gleaned from the shadows, the people she eliminated just to ensure his safety, the betrayal she sowed between him and the woman he really wanted. Biting down, her teeth clenched tightly, fighting the tears burning in her eyes. Myra, Naruto said in a near whisper, saying her name. She could tell it pained him. Naruto, who are you? Where are you? The boy asked, almost unsure of the words leaving his lips. I was everything a lie. Myra could only shake her head. No, everything I said, everything we did, all of it was real. Don't, the boy growled, but quickly winced. The whisker scars must still hurt him. The boy shot up, gloved hands resting against his cheeks, fighting the pain of his deep gashes that had only just begun to heal over. Don't say that, tell me the truth, Myra. I want to know who you are and why you have these skills. She gulped, brown eyes softening at his request. I was born to a whore in a brothel. I never knew my father. My sister and I scrounged everything we could just to eat. We had no roof over our head, too old for an orphanage. The master of the brothel hoped to have us as his employees before we even had our blood, but before that could ever happen, a master from the staff of the Red Keep had journeyed into that brothel and found us cleaning and cooking. He was so impressed by our talents that he quickly whisked us away to have us work the kitchens in the Red Keep. I know this. Naruto frowned, then Myra took a deep breath. Your queen mother spoke to me in her personal garden solar. She recruited me to her spy network because of mine and my sister's awareness within the Red Keep. We were good at what we did, appearing like regular, average and boring kitchen wenches who cooked, cleaned and served drinks. We however listened to words shared in the halls by courtiers and lords who felt too comfortable and reported everything to the queen. Nothing escaped her ears, especially anything pertaining to you. She had me spy on you. Spy on me? Naruto turned to her with a hot glare. At the time the queen was cruel and angry and hated the king. Robert, this was 2 years before you left to Winterfell. I swear it. Myra sighed, shutting her eyes. I never meant to fall in love with you. I never meant for you to fall for me. After that night we shared, I couldn't betray you. I spoke to the queen and quit my spying days despite the requests of Littlefinger and Lord Varys. I tried to stay away from that life. I did everything I could to remain neutral because I believed that you and I did you spy for Joffrey. Myra took a deep breath. I did. The prince took a deep breath, reining in his fury. He took a seat, turning to face her. I heard that my brother took Sansa from me. I heard that he sent Bran to the front lines at my side to have him killed without bloodying his own hands. Now I know that my closest friend was a spy and was the reason that's how you entered the dungeons that day, isn't it? No, Myra nearly shouted, her voice hoarse and scratched. I had to do things to get past the guards. I had to bribe, I had to show my body, I had to let some touch me, I had to see you, I had to make sure that they hadn't killed you. They did much worse to me. Myra, Naruto growled. She blinked. His eyes glimmered with unshed tears as they built within his sharp cold eyes. They fell free, spilling down, tracing in and out of his deep scars. I waited for you. I prayed for you to return every second that my mind was mine. I prayed for you to come back for me, but you never returned. You never showed your face. You left me, and now I look like a monster when you could have stopped them. No, she said in a harsh whisper, you do not look like a monster. Please, my love, listen to me. I regret everything I had done. I had a purpose when I was in the Red Keep. I had a purpose that was given to me by your mother and then your brother. I served because that was all I was good for. I know that I can never be truly forgiven for what I've done, but I will serve and fight for you to prove that you can. Trust me again, please, I'm begging you. My heart will always be yours, always. You fight against a losing battle, bastard. Melisandre called, unfazed by the cut. The others are on their way, and you waste time fighting against the Lord's chosen, the one who will save us from the coming darkness of the long night. He is Azor, a high reborn. Myra spat, pulling a knife from the ground. You're wrong. A whirlwind, a maelstrom, a whirlpool. He was no longer on sandy arena floor of the amphitheater. He was in an open battlefield fists raised, chakra raging off of his body. He was covered in golden flames snapping left and right. He charged for white-skinned, green-haired freaks that looked like clones of one another. Explosions tore across the field, throwing men and women across the chaos, showering with blood and ruined limbs. Moving without fear, he charged through the smoke and debris, slamming his fists into men and women with cracked skin and black sclerae weaving between their own punches. In the elements at their control, he and the army behind him charged onward. Knives flew across the field, arrows, spears and swords clashed and snapped, sparks like the flickering flames blown from pursed lips. He moved through it all on one hand. A Rasengan spun and screamed with the winds as it drilled through paper bodies and cracked flesh. He continued plowing through his opponents, cutting a deep swathe through the horde that faced him, body engorged with golden fire, soothed those around him, slamming his fists forward. The earth shattered before the power of the Rasengan. Compressed chakra screamed, drilling through stone and dirt, sending white-skinned clones back in smoke, tearing the paper bodies of those cracked men with a blur of movement. He crossed the distance, once more shoving his fist through a clone's body. He blinked. The man was no longer white-skinned nor topped with green hair. He gulped, sapphire eyes locked with empty brown belonging to a bearded man at arms. The man gurgled, choking on the blood that flooded from his mouth, spurting forth. The man grunted as Naruto pulled his arm free. He panted, taking a weak step back as the man fell to the dirt, broken and dead. He spun about, sword out, knife in the other hand. Dragonstone footmen fell around him, broken, bleeding, and dead corpses littering the amphitheater. With the only corpse he wanted missing, he blinked, wiping the blood from his forehead, careful not to aggravate the scars on his face. Ducking once again, he twirled the blade, shoving it through a footman's chest, blood spurting. The light and dark brown eyes faded, lost in the shadows. Pulling back, he sprinted up the steps, kicking, swinging, killing, before he looked to the sky to see white clouds drifting aimlessly, lifelessly, only split by the towers of the Red Keep, its crimson bricks, its great towering peaks slicing through nature's shade, cutting through the cerulean canvas. The sun that beamed in their late summer days was gone. The Red Keep was gone. The clouds that so haplessly dragged gone. All that remained, the crimson flame that chewed and devoured the weirwood tree. A strange sensation, a screaming ire that resonated within his body. He trembled, power screaming in his body, crying out for release and forgiveness. He fell back against the wooden stakes of the amphitheater's stands. He raised his blade, blocking an incoming swing. Drawing his dagger with a simple single motion, he drilled the blade through the head of the Dragonstone man at arms. As before, the light and blue eyes faded in gray, tearing the blade free. He slashed down, beheading the man. The sensation grew, bubbling within his stomach. It grew, screaming, clawing, spewing with rage. He whipped back up the stairs, fighting the cramping, the tightening muscles. Rage, anger, fury. He dashed up the stairs, making his way to the blazing godswood. Dragonstone squads had gathered, spears and shield, swords and shields, great swords and war axes. There were 20 of them waiting. Closing his eyes, he focused. It was a rally point. It had to be. Dragonstone levies and footmen must have used climbing spikes and vaulted their way up the stone levees. The shimmering Blackwater Bay behind him, ships began to sail toward the coast. He cursed under his breath. He should have known that the battle wasn't over. He should have known that it was too soon to have his grandfather and the Tyrells leave so soon. He wasn't ready, he wasn't prepared. Naruto cursed under his breath once more. I was a fool to overlook this, but I won't let them get away with this. I'm going to end this now. I don't care what people say. I don't care about hiding my powers anymore. I am Prince Naruto Baratheon. I am the reincarnation of Naruto Uzumaki. I am done hiding. Throwing his sword, smoke popped on his vambrace. A beautiful greatsword shimmered as it appeared through the cloud, forming a cross-hand sign. Smoke popped around him. Grabbing the sword, he charged forward toward the gathered infantry. Through the shroud of smoke, several clones of himself appeared, vaulting over the crates and fences of stone and wood like a golden blur. They charged forward, swords risen and reflecting what sun peered through the black smoke. Swords clashing, clones popping. All that remained in the skirmish was the blonde whisker-scarred prince of the Seven Kingdoms, heart's bane in hand. He charged for the godswood, bellowing commands to all who would listen. Once he arrived, he was suddenly repelled, stumbling back. His boots clapped against stone. Ducking low, he weaved back the edge of his blade, jamming into his assailant's side. Drawing it out, he bisected the man, cleaving him in two with ease. There was something wrong about the situation. Naruto could feel it, blood drying against his face as sweat slicked his hair, sticking it to his cheeks, shading his eyes from sight. He peered between the energy surrounding the godswood. A young woman with brown locks of hair stood before a woman with flaming red hair. The younger one moved with practiced grace, blue energy glowing off of her body as she ducked, tucked, and weaved, slipping in and out between pillars and bolts of compressed fire. Naruto had rarely seen such agility outside of himself. It was then that it clicked in his head. Myra punching the magic barrier. It didn't respond, humming and even screaming back at him, keeping him at bay. He punched, pushing his weight against it, only the magic to respond with the same force, nearly throwing him over the cliff and into the Blackwater Bay behind him. A hum responded, echoing from the Valyrian steel sword to his sweaty, sticky palms. Twirling the sword, he pressed its blade against the barrier, surprised to see it sheath as if it were pressed into butter. Cutting through the magic, he cursed, forcing his way into the flaming arena. Rolling into the fight, he and Myra stood before the red witch, weapons and hand chakra burning off of their bodies. He watched her as she weaved with agile grace, vaulting in and out of attacks as if she were dancing with every move of her limbs. Trails of light blue energy danced and waved from her pores, and outstretched fingers whipping back, she grabbed a knife and cut through bolts of fire and threading her way in and out of pillars of flame, each time burning through chakra as she maneuvered through the onslaught. Coming to a stop, she landed beside the prince, shoulder to shoulder. He glanced her way, sapphire meeting chocolate brown, sweat dribbling down their brows. They took a deep breath. When were you going to tell me this? This is hardly the time or place for this conversation, right? I just Naruto raised Heartsbane, the glittering swirls of the Valyrian steel, humming with chakra reflecting fire back in dull light. What's the plan? I've never known you to struggle against an opponent before. She's using some strange magic to control the flames, and she has an invisible barrier that blocks all of my knives. Myra panted. She's stationary, but that's what makes her dangerous. I nicked her once, but it wasn't enough to even make her flinch. Naruto poised Heartsbane, he and Myra pacing as they did in their sieges during the war. However, under the smoke and fire, Melisandre stood there watching him, and only him, wide-eyed and paling. By the second, her confident smirk and condescending sneer vanished, replaced with confusion. Myra saw it. Naruto did too, reaching for their belts. Naruto tossed his lover a knife in the seconds as it left his hand. She grabbed it, twirling it between her fingers. Sapphire met chocolate brown. A blink, a breath, a whisper. They snapped their arms forward, knives spiraling through the air. Their edges clanged and sparked against the invisible barrier. Focusing his eyes, the knives sparked, bouncing off the floor and ricocheting back toward them. Caught between the pads of their fingertips, with a quick swing and a lightning snap, they hurled the knives forward once again, only for the blades to bounce back, clanging off stone walls and back to their hands. The Red Witch spoke a dark incantation, leaving her lips. She flinched, taking a step back. Seeing this, the two of them shot forward, knives flying, ignoring the ricochets, throwing themselves into the barrier. Naruto and Myra noticed it, the shimmering light refracting against the energy. It wasn't as invisible as they thought. Pushing against it once more, they pushed, pushing Heartsbane against it. Valyrian steel against Valyrian magic was the only key to the impossible lock. I it see, can't be. You, Melisandre hummed. I know who you are, Naruto Baratheon, or should I say Naruto Uzumaki Yuzu. What? Myra lowered her weapons for a moment. What do you know? Which I know that you are lost to time. Melisandre chuckled. Interesting, isn't it? The whiskers that carve your face, the fierce blue eyes that stare down death, the sun-kissed blonde hair darker than the platinum blonde of Lannisters. Don't you question it, Uzumaki. Don't think you can talk your way out of this. Which? Naruto bellowed. Bastard. Melisandre laughed heartily. Her blue eyes widened as her cackle turned hysterical, fire rising, eating away at weirwood bark. She howled wildly. You were right, I was wrong. Stepping aside, still trapped within the barrier, she turned to the limb and, panting, crippled and bleeding Stannis Baratheon, who knelt behind her, flicking her wrist with another Valyrian word. The would-be king suddenly burst into crimson flame, fire as red as blood. Stannis screeched as his flesh melted and his bones quickly turned to ash. Melisandre turned, snapping to Naruto and Myra. I was wrong. It is you who is Azor Ahai reborn. It is you who is Aegon Targaryen reborn. Myra blinked, turning to the prince beside her. What the fuck is she talking about? There are things that I've learned and things that I've accepted, Naruto responded, still remaining cryptic. So what if I am? What's it to you? Which I, Melisandre hissed. I refuse to believe it. The Lord must be wrong. Clapping her hands together, waves of fire crashed together in front of her, springing to Naruto and Myra. The Baratheon raised his Valyrian greatsword, light as feathers, stronger than the strongest of steels, twirled the blade with ease, blocking the incoming flame. It quickly dissipated against the spinning blade. Myra fell back, hurling her knives through the wall of fire, keeping watch of the ricochet patterns bouncing back and forth, deflecting off the dome of invisible magic and back down to the dirt. Blinking, she found her path of approach. Tapping Naruto's shoulder, she quickly told him her plan. Wait, Myra. Naruto turned to her as the flames died down. That's dangerous. I see, can't let you do this. The longer we wait, the more time we give the bitch. Myra glowered. We have already stalled too long. I don't know what's going on outside of this Godswood, but I don't doubt that Dragonstone is throwing their forces against the Mud Gate once again, this time with the city distracted and underprepared. If my understanding of her magic is correct, this was only possible because of her. Naruto nodded. Just like with Lord Tarly at Tumbleton. Fine, just don't do anything stupid, Myra. Sansa, and I need you. I won't. I love you. Go. I'll keep the flames off of you. Sansa. The redhead awoke from her slumber, immediately unsheathing a dagger, throwing the linens From her bed she marched to her door, curious, afraid, nervous. She rested her hand against the handle, shifting locks and bars. She swung the door open, focusing on the sound, dagger out, poised and ready to stab anyone who dared to threaten her sister. She froze in her step. Arya stood in front of her door, her left eye snapped shut and swollen black, barring her teeth. She stepped into the solar, twirling her knife as Arya had taught her. She didn't need to ask what happened. She didn't need to know. All she did know was that someone struck her sister. Someone somewhere is walking free, thinking they could get away with this. Thankfully she knew her sister better than that lady, and Nymeria snarled, growling and barking at someone within the solar. Turning on her heel, she watched as a man laid on the floor, his mouth gagged and his limbs bound tight. Blood trickled down his brow, his clothes disheveled and torn, spattered with blood. As well he groaned, shifting his weight to get away from the growing dire wolves, but he was stuck. He was bound in almost 7 feet of rope, his wrists and his ankles chafing, the soles of his feet bloodied and torn. The man said nothing, keeping his glare focused on her and her alone. Who is this? Sansa turned to her sister. He's a spy, Arya murmured. I saw him stalking behind me and Syrio. He got a hit on me before Syrio was able to knock him unconscious. Don't worry, it doesn't hurt anymore. At least then why'd you bring him here instead of taking him to the Queen? Sansa asked. You do realize he could kill us if he ever broke out of his binds. This is dangerous. And then what were you thinking? She's busy and said she didn't want to be bothered by anyone. That one Kingsguard was there. Sir Meryn, Arya pleaded. I didn't know where else to go. Syrio is going back to Bravo soon, and I didn't want to bother any more people when we should be the ones to solve our problems. Don't you agree? Sansa sighed through her flaring nostrils. Listen, Arya, I know why you did it, but I cannot condone this after this instance. This is too dangerous, bringing a man into our solar, even with our skills with a blade. What if it isn't enough you just invited a rat into our chambers? I am. Arya hissed. I'm sorry. Alright, next time I'll try to fight past. Sir Meryn, is that what you want? You can pretend and think yourself clever by hiding what Joffrey and his Kingsguard had done to you, but I can see it. I know what he's done, and what they have done near my sister. Stop trying to protect me. Let me carry the burden for once. Sansa's eyes hardened at the name, flashes of his fists, his kicks and his slaps danced across her mind. Holding her breath she nearly choked. The mere mention of that name sent shivers up and down her spine. How he'd tear her dress before the court, how he'd scar her, cut her and beat her before their eyes for more than just the king's amusement but his own. Shaking her head she maintained her steel gaze on the man, who remained silent. However, this time his gaze was no longer on her and only her. His brown eyes would trail ever so slightly to the dagger clutched between her fingers and back to her sister, who had already drawn needle. Don't look at her, look at me and only me. Sansa said low. I want to know why you were following my sister and our dancing teacher. I expect an answer. Quickly pulling the gag down he spat, spitting curses and saliva. Sansa without thinking raised her dagger and pressed it against the man's throat. His anger, his fury, his desperation immediately faded, replaced with unadulterated fear. She leaned in, dagger pressing ever deeper. That was rude. I won't ask again. Who are you working for? Why did they have you follow my sister and our dancing master? The man shook his head, fighting from his bind. Sansa froze. Arya moved a needle in hand. It was a moment, a split second, that all of their plans fell apart. Just as Arya prepared to thrust forward, the man kicked out, knocking Arya on her side. As she crashed with her table, the man shot forward to Sansa, throwing his arms around her neck. As she turned to run, Sansa couldn't do a thing as he used the very binds he was wrapped in to choke the breath from her lungs. As her face reddened as he strangled her, Sansa fought back, shooting her head back. The man stumbled, his nose shattering, filling with adrenaline. She pulled, hoisting him over her head, slamming him into the floor. He grunted, shouting with pain. Within the seconds he rolled around, eyeing Arya's sword. It was split-second decision between the two, who were still standing. Sansa shredded her dress and shoved her knee into the man's face. Grabbing her dagger she twirled it in her hand, immediately plunging it into the man's head. Blood spilled free, painting her arm crimson, staining her light blue dress. Arya panted, raising needle. Sansa, are you okay? Sansa ducked the whites of her eyes. The only thing seen. Lady jumped off her back, throwing herself into a dragonstone levy, a shattered spear shaft, a chewed up heater shield. She twirled her sword once more, shooting her arm forward. The man cried out as the blade simply sheared through his chest and leather jerkin. She didn't make a sound, pulling her sword free at her side. Bran lifted his shield, the whites of his eyes revealed. Summer at his side charged forward, jumping onto his shield, using it as a springboard. Flying through the air, the gigantic direwolf crashed into a dragonstone levy as well, crushing the man's chest. Sansa, Bran, the two of them snapped at attention, brown eyes and ice blue flipping down. Running up to them, several members of the Fox Company ran into the field. The Hedge Knights ran with Brienne and Sandor Clegane, led by Arya. Maya and Gendry, the siblings, looked to one another, blood dripping past their eyelids. They repositioned, focusing on the fight, renewed and brimming with life. Once again Arya ran to their sides, twirling her needle. What the hell happened here? Arya questioned with wide eyes, Nymeria whining as she ran to Summer and Lady. I don't know, Bran shrugged. Wiping blood from his forehead, Stannis was about to be killed. Then the Godswood was on fire and Dragonstone invaded. Naruto and Myra are nowhere to be found, and someone within the Red Keep betrayed the Fox Company. All of our troops that were stationed within the grounds were killed, so we're killing everyone. Dragonstone got it. Arya took a stance. I'm ready when you two are. Let's make a game. Why don't we? Bran gave his sister a smirk. Arya looked to him, with sparkles in her gray eyes. Seriously, you already have a head start, then you have plenty reason to catch up, Bran shouted, charging ahead against Sansa's cries. Summer ran at his side as they battled with a Dragonstone man at arms. Arya scoffed, running ahead, Nymeria barking at her side. She too ignoring Sansa. The eldest Stark daughter cursed under the breath. She watched them fight like masters of their craft against grown men who trained for this. Imbued with bloodlust, they were undaunted and unafraid, as if they were invincible. Sansa couldn't breathe. Is this my fault? She questioned as Fox Company flooded the battlefield, pushing ladders back to the shore. The Hedge Knights of the Battle Companions bellowed commands, with the bastards of the late King Robert leading troops into combat. Gendry, hung by Arya and Maya, stayed at Bran's side. Did I cause all of this? Sansa questioned once more. This isn't what I wanted. Tears forming in her eyes, Lady whimpered at her side, nudging her leg. My family is corrupted, and I did nothing but nurture it. If this is my punishment for being an absolute cunt before, please, by the old gods and the new, please give me back my brother and sister. Naruto charged into the magic barrier, jamming Heartsbane into the energy, cutting through it like the barrier from before. He sliced toward Melisandre, finally breaking her stationary cockiness. Just as the opening made itself known, Myra snapped her arms forward, hurling knives imbued with chakra, piercing through the smallest of crevices. Melisandre screamed, the blades piercing through her shoulders. She fell back, stumbling over her feet, blood spurting wildly as chakra spread through the wound. As the magic began to fade, Naruto twirled Heartsbane, only for the Valyrian steel sword to meet with another. To his surprise, the sword was on fire, blazing wildly. To his surprise, it was his uncle Stannis, a dark, empty look in his eyes. His sword arm was replaced with another, a terrifying conglomeration of flesh. His stumped leg was replaced with a new one as well. Falling back, the Baratheon ducked under the sword named Lightbringer. Flickering flames danced off of its length as it jumped and sang, weaving around the man's powerful yet blind swings. He fell back, dodging lunges and swipes. Their blades met in a deadlock, sparks singing and flames dancing. Stannis said nothing, as if his mind was non-existent. Taking advantage of the confusion, he slid the blade free. Seconds mattered when facing off in a duel. The slightest misstep, the slightest hair out of place, the slightest breath taken too soon, all of it mattered. Taking a quick sidestep, he weaved away from Stannis's overhead strike. Sapphire eyes took notice. Stannis was slow, as if time had frozen in front of him. His uncle's chest was left open, twirling Heartsbane once again. He jammed the blade into the man's chest, sheathing the blade into his body. Stannis gurgled, choking on his blood. The man still said nothing as the sword was torn from his chest. There was nothing left for him as his knees folded, his body suddenly splitting in two as it fell to the ground. Melisandre toppled back, pressing her body against the weirwood, knives still embedded in her flesh. Naruto rushed to Myra's side, sword tip at her throat. This, the witch panted, this changes nothing. Kill me and be done with it. There's another you must face if you are going to achieve your destiny. Prince Naruto, her name is Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, the one who brought back your chakra and my magic. If you really want to do your duty, find her. I've heard enough of this shit. Myra spat, bringing her knife down. Melisandre's eyes widened as the blade pierced through her skull. Almost immediately, the flames that engulfed the gods would vanish. The smoke that burned and billowed into the sky faded. The battle cries, the beating of drums, and the clashing of steel disappeared. Horns were blown in the distance, the pops of men falling to their doom, meeting like a drumline. That's Naruto nudged the bastard. Good job, all of this from a trial by combat. No, it was a ruse. Naruto frowned, lured us into a false sense of security. They knew the Fox Company was bloated from its victory. They caught us off guard, but at least they didn't get very far. Opening his arms, the bastard rushed to him, throwing her arms around him. They embraced one another tightly, as they did that day in Tumbleton, as they did several times in the last few weeks. They held one another this time. There was something different about the embrace, a deeper understanding, a closer burning passion as their bodies pressed together, a new warmth, a new fire igniting as the seconds passed between them foreheads. Together they stared into each other's eyes, longing and loving. They said nothing as they slipped past each other, resting their chins on each other's shoulder. After this, I think you, me, and Sansa need to travel somewhere nice. While the country is in civil war, I doubt any of the nice holdfasts are clear. Right, every coast in existence in the West is being raided by Greyjoy's gods. There's nothing good about this nation anymore. Why don't we go to Essos and do what I hear Pentos and Bravos are nice This time of the year tempting, very tempting. It was quiet, the lull of battle dying down. It was then that she sensed it, footsteps, at presence she didn't recognize it. Eyes widening for a split second, she reacted, grabbing Naruto's shoulders. She pushed him aside. The prince tumbled over his feet in slow motion, watching as a spear closed in where he was once standing. Slow motion seconds passed like hours as he fell back. Myra stood still, her hands still outstretched, leaving her body open. Sapphire eyes followed the spear as it closed the distance, piercing the woman's chest. He couldn't breathe. The one holding the spear was Saber Trant of the Kingsguard, a sickening smile on his cruel face as he skewered Myra. Once his back hit the dirt, he rolled over, all sound and motion returning to normal, rushing into the ears like a screaming witch. As Saber drove the weapon into Myra's chest, he dropped it, letting her topple to the ground, spewing blood. He drew his sword, bellowing something about traitors and the king's demands. He shouted something about loyalty and his anointed knight status. Naruto couldn't hear it. The knight's cruel spats drowned by Myra's gurgling pleas. Eyes burning with fury, he held out a hand. Saber raised his sword, closing the distance with him. Hand outstretched, a ball of compressed chakra came to life, spiraling in 100 different directions, almost a foot in diameter. Naruto rushed forward, focusing on the man's gold-colored breastplate, targeting the tip of the crown carved into the metal sheet, jamming the Rasengan into the man's chest. Saber screamed out, his sword flying from his loose hand as the chakra drilled into his chest. Blood, bone, flesh shredded at the intense speeds and screaming winds forcing his arm forward. The man shot back, howling, before the chakra exploded, shredding his body to ribbons. As the winds died, all that remained was his upper torso, mangled and left with nothing but gore. He flipped around, rushing to Myra's side. The woman's eyes were dull, her jaw hung loose, her hands wrapped around the spear shaft. It was her final attempt. Myra, Naruto whispered, hand on her shoulder. She didn't respond, only falling limp into his arms. Myra, Naruto, a familiar voice he hadn't heard in a long time echoed in his head. Do not lose hope. I cannot do anything to help her unless you calm down. Sakura. Naruto flinched. Where have you been? Where has Sasuke been? None of that matters right now, Sakura shouted back. Right now, if you want to save her, I need you to calm down and listen to my instruction. Am I understood? Deal with that Kingsguard knight later. Deal with your king brother later. Right now her safety is paramount. Agreed. Agreed. Naruto nodded. What do you need me to do? Take the spear out of her body and carry her toward the godswood. Sakura said the reason that witch was burning the godswood was because she was trying to siphon its ancient power, the power of chakra. I don't have time to give you the full history lesson, but in time I will. All you need to know right now is that Godswood and Weirwood specifically were chosen by the children of the forest because of their natural latent power. These trees are descendants of the god tree that birthed chakra. The witch wanted to destroy it because of her gods. Well, okay. Naruto nodded, not really understanding what the pinkette was saying. Myra, this is going to hurt. Please stay with us, Sansa. And I need you. Wrapping his hand around the spear shaft, he yanked it free. With one motion, Myra did nothing, laying limp and lifeless in his arms. More people rushed to them. He could sense them nearing as he hoisted her into his arms. Sansa, Bran, and Arya were the first ones to burst into the godswood. Myra, Sansa gasped, dropping her sword. She nearly fainted. What happened? It was Saber, wasn't it? Arya pointed at the man's broken corpse. Sansa, exploding with fury, fell back, falling onto her, but hands pressed to her head. She looked up, watching as Naruto rested Myra's body against the roots of the weirwood. What are you doing, Naruto? I am. He took a deep breath. Sakura's instructions booming in his head. I'm going to save her. Fox Company and the battle companions had arrived, securing the godswood and watching with curious eyes. The prince took a deep breath, resting his hands over the garish wound tearing across Myra's chest. He focused, remembering Sakura's words. He cobbled together his chakra through his coils, forcing energy together. He tightened his gaze, molding it to perfection. Turquoise energy engulfed his hands, drawing many wild gasps from those watching. He tightened his focus, ignoring their whispers. There was nothing else in the world but the weirwood. Sansa and Myra under him. Turquoise energy flittered into the wound, reacting almost immediately. Her chakra coils came to life, jump-started by the incoming chakra. Naruto maintained his focus as blood disappeared, seeping back into the wound. He kept fighting, molding his chakra, concentrating on the wound, on Sansa, on Myra, and his coils. As the energy collided and siphoned into the woman's chest, her wound closed completely. Sakura gave her final command and disappeared once again. Naruto listened and did as he was told, forcing the last bit of the turquoise aura into Myra's body. The woman suddenly choked, coughing and sputtering up blood and bile keeling over. She puked between the weirwood roots, panting and suffocating. Shooting up, she was suddenly embraced by Sansa and Naruto at the same time, keeling over against the venerated tree. Myra couldn't believe what was possible. Naruto couldn't either. The three of them stared at one another, fear-abetted love filling the void that had settled. He took a deep breath, his mind whirling and reeling from everything they had just done. All of this. I killed my uncle. I watched my other uncle die. I killed many people in the last year. I ended family lines. I ended noble bloodlines. I sent men and women to their deaths. I caused chaos. I caused destruction. I created this nonsense. When I refused to die, when I refused to fight back, it's my fault. This cycle of destruction, it nearly claimed Myra's life, it nearly claimed Sansa's, Bran's, Arya's, Gendry, and Maya's, all of this, because I couldn't stay focused and remember the goal. Myra's smile, Sansa's shaking cries, it burned in his brain as he watched them in one moment. I could have lost her, I could have lost them both, because I wasn't doing what I had to do. What is it that I have to do? Sit on that stupid throne, wear a heavy crown, delegate, and demand that people lay their lives at my feet like some coward? No, I can't, not anymore. I knew coming back would change the trajectory of my destiny, but I never knew it would be this. Melisandre's words echoed in his head. Daenerys Targaryen, my father would never shut up about her, especially when he learned that she was alive, leading a Dothraki horde. Find her, the witch said. She was the reason magic had reawakened. She was the reason that chakra is alive in me. And Myra, who else was affected by this? I don't know, but if more people are revealing powers as great as this, I need to find them and bring us together. I can't be bothered with a chair and a crown when something as large as this is at hand. I can't. Myra, Sansa, please don't be angry with me. Turning his gaze away, he froze. Fox Company, the battle companions, even Arya and Bran, were on their knees. They bowed their heads before him, pale and shaken by what they had seen. And Naruto, Bran said in a near whisper, are you Ser Delran? Couldn't piece the words together. Are you a god? Lady Tarina blurted, what you did? It's impossible. No. Naruto shook his head, pulling Sansa and Myra to their feet. He turned to the Fox Company men and women who fought beside him in Tumbleton, in the Reach, and at the Battle of the Blackwater. These were the greatest, the finest, the strongest, and the most courageous people he had ever been honored to lead into combat. But they were wrong. He was no god. I'm not. Then are you some kind of wizard? Then a recruit asked with a shaking voice. Wizards aren't real, idiot. Another elbowed him. No, I'm not a wizard either. Naruto rolled his eyes. What now then, my prince? Ser Delran asked, his eyes trailing to the corpse of Ser Marin Trant. That is a member of the Kingsguard. Your brother sent him to kill you. Lady Tarina, Ser Andar and Jalabar and myself were with your mother, the Queen Regent. I will do the only thing I can. Naruto growled, lifting Heartsbane. He turned to the Red Keep. I'm going to kill him. Wait, my lord. Ser Delran and several of Knights of Fox Company shot to their feet. That is a drastic decision to make. We haven't even mobilized the rest of the Fox Company. I told him if he dared to harm any of us, I would end him and his rule. Naruto glared at the knights. If I am banished, punished even for doing this, I don't care. I am going to tear him down and his worthless Kingsguard and end this god's damned war today. If I have to. We are wasted killing each other. In this country there are greater threats on the horizon, and we're supposed to sit here and take the manic whims of a worthless king. Levy's lords and knights turned their gaze to him, running a hand through his blonde hair. He continued, we have wasted under his command, wasted thinking that he holds any real power anymore. He who started this damn war and used me as his scapegoat. We are wasted thinking we have to fight for that damn throne, and the one who sits upon it. I'm done fighting for Westeros. I am done fighting for the Iron Throne. What do you intend to do then? Ser Delran asked. After I kill my brother, I will ride out to meet Robb Stark and bring him and my grandfather to the table for peace talks. Naruto said, the question of succession will be asked, and someone will need to sit on the Iron Throne. It won't be me. Not now. At least I have something I need to do. These powers, I have no doubt there are others in the world just like me, and I intend to find them before another monster like the Red Witch or Stannis are created. Why, you're going to leave Jalabar? Asked. I am, but not until I know for certain that Westeros won't go up in flames the instant I set sail. Naruto walked past them, Sansa and Myra behind him. I know it's a lot to ask of any of you, but those of you who want no part of this may leave, and we will never speak of this again. No one moved a muscle. Then come on, we have a lot to do. Naruto marched into the Red Keep, Fox Company at his back. He wasn't exactly subtle in his declaration. Within the godswood, killing gold cloaks and loyal troops of the royal army. He burst within the castle, killing any Sodder who dared to draw their sword at him. Bran was quick with the bow. Arya was deft at close range, sliding between larger opponents, using their size to her advantage. Sansa was equally skilled, using her daggers and lady to strike down her targets. Myra, still weak from her death, did her best to keep up. Horns were blown within the castle as soldiers rushed to meet them, only to meet death instead. As they neared the throne room, Naruto shoved his shoulder into the great doorway, entering the throne room covered in blood and entrails. Twirling Heartsbane, he raised it to the king. Joffrey stood at the Iron Throne, crossbow in hand, shaking as kept his stance. Cersei sat at his side, panicking with Tommen in her arms. At Kingsguard, Ser Boros stood beside her, sword against them both. At the base of the throne, however, was something he never expected to see. Banners of Fox Company were raised throughout the throne room. Well over 200 men were stationed with archers on parapets and terraces above. Fox Company troops that once followed him stood in front of the king, couching spears, raising shields, and wielding swords and axes. Flanking the king on either side, however, were crossbowmen and bowmen already knocked and drawn. At the head of them were several knights, men who were anointed after the Battle of the Blackwater, men he had led into Tumbleton himself, men and Women he bled with and nearly died with. They were men and women who were imprisoned after the battle and taken to Renly's camp. They were people who swore loyalty to him, yet they stood before Joffrey as if he was the one who called upon them, trained them, charged into battle with them. It infuriated him, but his sapphire eyes could not turn away from his weeping mother and his cradled brother. Ser Boros soared too close to his mother's neck. "Stand down now, brother," Joffrey shouted with a shaking voice. "If you take another step, I will kill Mother and Tommen. I am the king, and you will not take this from me as you had taken everything else. So I have taken what remained loyal in the Fox Company. These are your troops you and your companions have trained. These are men and women who are still loyal to the one power in the Seven Kingdoms. Step out of line, brother. They aren't like Dragonstone or the Reachmen. They can hurt you and kill you. Do not test me, Joffrey," Naruto growled. "Let our mother and brother go. I should kill them right now," Joffrey bellowed. "Mother admitted to me everything. Me, Myrcella, and Tommen were not Robert's children, were Uncle Jaime's. You, however, and those bastards you brought with you are the children of Robert Baratheon. Threats to my claim of the Iron Throne. My trusted advisor told me that I could no longer wait, that you were going to steal my crown. And what little you hadn't already, he told me that you were going to murder me. Your advisor was right," Naruto spat. I told you when I first returned to this wretched city that I would kill you and all who support you if you dared to hurt one of my people. Ser Maren lies dead like mangled meat in a slaughterhouse because of what he did to Myra. Now all that remains is to finish the job. Remember, Joffrey, I may be Robert's son, but I am still our mother's son. A Lannister always pays their debts, and it's time for you to pay yours. Don't you hear yourself?" Joffrey growled. Myra caught wind of someone entering behind the king. It was Hardin, the old spymaster, waddling behind the Iron Throne. His whispers were empty, vile, and laced with poison. Joffrey nodded at the words, shaking as he clutched his crossbow. "That bastard Myra served me after Mother decided to leave her spies in favor for love. They came to me looking for work. Myra was one of them. Your face is scarred. Lord Stark is dead because of her. Everything that tore us apart was because of her. If anyone is to be blamed, it should be that bastard. You think we don't know this already?" Sansa bellowed. The direwolves snarled as they bent back ready to pounce. "You really think she wouldn't have told us the truth after everything we've been through and done?" "Oh, Sansa," Joffrey laughed, "I knew you were a liar, like my mother, like my father, like my brother. Everyone is a liar. No one can be trusted. None of you can be trusted. Just you wait, Sansa. When I kill my brother, when I have everyone behind you, and everyone you love dead at your feet, I will break you until you are nothing more than a pup clinging to my legs." "Naruto, my sweet Cersei called." Her hair hung low, hiding Tommen from sight. Her voice was broken, shaken to its core. Raising her head, it revealed her last child, limp in her arms, a trail of blood seeping from the corner of his mouth. "Don't worry about me. Fuck this throne. Do what must be done." Shooting to her feet, she pushed Ser Boros, still holding Tommen. She ran to Joffrey, who in the confusion turned with his crossbow pointed at her. As if time slowed down once more, Naruto had already started moving. Joffrey's shaking hands pulled the trigger. The bolt shot forward inch by inch. There was nothing Naruto could do. Springing forward, Cersei gasped as the bolt pierced through her chest. The woman fell forward, toppling over Joffrey. It was as if the world had stopped. Naruto stood there mid-step, frozen in his body as the world halted around him. Bowstrings were loose and arrows were sent. Shield walls rushed toward them, wielded by men blinded by fear and rage. Swords and axes held overhead, spears lowered and poised to kill. All that mattered to him, however, was his mother and baby brother. Joffrey just killed her. He could save her. He had the power to change the world. He needed to. Taking a focused step forward, he fought against his own fears, cutting through a man's face beside him. Ser Delran raised his shield, blocking a spear on the other side. Myra weaved between shafts and swordsman knives in hand, as acrobatic as ever. Before the Hedge Knights met their targets, fearless as they ever were, swinging with precision and daunting strength, Lady Tarina clashed with a knight, jamming her scimitar into his throat, meeting her rack with another. Sansa moved with Arya underneath her, their direwolves matching Lady Soresh's movements and speed, their animal companions striking and chewing through levies and blocking spears in the carnage. Naruto fought his way to the Iron Throne. As he neared, however, an arrow lodged into his shoulder, falling back. A new recruit, one he never had the pleasure of meeting, threw himself in the line of fire peppered with arrows and bolts. As the boy fell to the floor dead, Naruto shot back up, yanking the arrow from his shoulder. Once again arrows were fired, twirling Heartsbane. Some were deflected, others pierced his side and his other shoulder. Once again he fell back yet again. This time two recruits, blinded by zeal or loyalty, threw themselves into the meat grinder, their bodies engorged with arrows and bolts. Naruto couldn't breathe as the bodies began to pile and the blood was spilt. He was losing his mother by the second. Cutting his way through the royal army, he finally made it to the steps before the Iron Throne. Just as the archers and crossbowmen turned their gaze to him, the Hedge Knights arrived, raising their shields to protect him. Arrows beat and deflected off the bulwarks. The six of them took a breath together, counting the seconds for the barrage to end as one. The shields broke they charged up the steps cutting down the archers as quickly as they could. The chaos continued. Naruto flinched, skin turning cold as Ser Dougras fell back, a crossbow bolt lodged into his left eye. Flinching once again he turned. Ser Delran was skewered by a spear. The man gargled and choked as the man-at-arms that did it forced him to the floor. Across the way Brienne and Sandor were struggling as they were overwhelmed by their opponents snapping back at attention. He cursed under his breath. Warren fell back, a bolt lodged into his throat. Naruto couldn't breathe. There was so much going on around him. Just as everything reached a fever pitch, he caught sight of Sansa shouting as a spearhead jammed into her shoulder. He watched as Bran had his legs swiped out from under him. He could only watch as Arya and Gendry fell over, arrows in their sides. Everything was falling apart. They were falling apart. The Fox Company that they trained, that they taught, every trick they had learned and gained, used it against them. They created their own worst enemy, and to Naruto he couldn't believe that he'd been so blind as to think it would never be turned against him. Anger rising, fury bubbling, chakra kneading his eyes, burned crimson bleeding through the sapphire, pushing his dead mother off of Joffrey. He lifted the shaken king and turned his gaze to the Iron Throne. Burning with Herculean strength he smashed Joffrey's face into the Iron Throne, blood spilling as the boy's face was cut open in an instant. Naruto didn't react as spears and swords and arrows were jammed into his back. Lifting his brother's face from the swords he brought it down again, digging Joffrey's face across the surface of the throne as another spear pierced his side. Lady Sorsha rushed in with Lady Tarina at her side, protecting the prince from all who dared to strike at him. Pulling Joffrey's face back he slammed it against the seat itself, dragging his face against the welded and forged swords, cutting into bone and brain. Again and again he kept slamming Joffrey into the seat until the boy's head burst open, leaving nothing but broken skull and torn flesh. Joffrey's body fell limp, sliding from the seat, leaving a trail of blood and brain bits dripping from the forged edges. Naruto couldn't breathe. He snapped out of his reverie as the Fox Company that stood with Joffrey threw down their swords and shields, his anger rising, reaching a fever pitch. The weapons embedded in his body shot free, clattering across blood-slaked tile floors. He turned on his heels, reaching down for his mother, turquoise chakra coming to life in his hands. He began to pour the energy into Cersei, but the power visibly bounced off, surprising all who watched. Pushing, pulsing, fighting back against death, he forced the healing chakra into his mother, only for the power to be rejected as if meeting an invisible force field. Cersei didn't respond. Her dilated eyes remained so her chest didn't rise or fall. She was gone. Naruto, in a panic, tears streaming down his face, ran to his baby brother, energy bouncing back as if refusing to heed. Chakra cursing, now hyperventilating, he shot to his feet, lifting Ser Dougras, yanking the bowl from his head. He poured the healing chakra through the wound, but to everyone's terror the energy visibly siphoned through the hole, exiting out the back of the former knight's head. Why? Naruto asked. Why aren't you fucking healing? Myra rushed to his side, taking his hands into her own. She shook her head, regret and shame on her face. Naruto took a deep breath, shaking in his armor. Sakura, why aren't they healing like Myra did? It's because they don't have chakra. As if the day could get any worse. It did the greatest power in the world. It's fucking useless. Naruto asked himself. In our time, Naruto, everyone had chakra coils. In this time almost no one does. Sakura said our chakra works because of chakra coils. Without those coils there's nothing for the chakra to travel through. These bodies are empty voids for chakra. I'm sorry, there's nothing you can do there. They're gone. Naruto lowered his head, sobbing as the battle came to a close. Clenching his teeth he laid Ser Warren to the floor, springing to his feet fuming with unadulterated rage. He turned to his men, their faces awestruck by his crimson eyes and the power radiating off of his body. Standing before the Iron Throne, the shattered windows and the blood-slaked halls, they fell to their knees. Fox Company, those of you who betrayed me will be put to the sword. You have betrayed not only me but all of us. You killed our friends and family for something as pointless as a crown. From this day forward I am shedding the name that kept me bound to this cursed place. No longer am I Prince Naruto Baratheon, I am Naruto Uzumaki. Come, my brothers and sisters who remain. We have a war to end. What of the city? Let it burn.